nice quick meeting. 20 minutes, 25 minutes, that's about all we'll take, I think, today. I just wanted to call this meeting to order and ask if there's any disclosure of pecuniary interest on the municipal conflict of interest act. Okay, seeing none. Before we get into presentations and announcements, so we're going to be talking about our Tier 3 budget update today, and we have the GRCA folks here with us today. I wanted to just do a thank you to our staff, our CEO Andy, his management team, and all the staff right now. I just wanted to take a minute to thank them for all that they're doing right now. It's not business as usual. Operating in this pandemic situation is trying for everybody, but I know staff are having to make decisions on a daily basis. They're having to adapt, and they're having to work with the information that we have, and when you're dealing with a pandemic that nobody has seen before, that makes it tough. So thanks on behalf of council, on behalf of the community, Andy, and your whole team for all of the work that you do on a daily basis. So we really appreciate that. Presentation, the first thing we have is our Tier 3 water budget. We have a presentation. I think Martin Keller, you're here, right? Are you going to be doing the presentation on your own, Martin?
Good afternoon, Mayor. I'm actually thinking I will start, and we plan to have
you're not muted, but we can't hear you.
Okay, I'm trying to do it this way. Is that better?
No, you're still not coming through.
Oh.
I can hear him.
Is it better? Is it that? Can you hear me now?
Does everybody hear him except for me?
Yes, I hear him.
Okay, well, I'll have to figure myself out here. So, Martin, do you want to go ahead and do your presentation?
Yes, I will be starting, and we also have with us Sonja and Kyle, Sonja Strynatka from GRCA and Kyle Davis from St. Wellington. So I will be giving a quick overview at the beginning. Now, are we sharing the slides? How is that going to work? I think you're unmuted.
Yes. So Carrie's just going to make sure that this works. You just have to close the windows and pull up your presentation, Martin. And I'm good. I can hear everybody now. Kyle, did you want to say something beforehand before we hand it over to Martin? I should have maybe turned it over to you first.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. No, that's okay. I'll let Martin present, and then I'll just introduce the presentation, and then I'll be actually doing the last bit of the presentation to wrap it up. So.
Okay, that sounds great.
I guess while we're waiting for the slide deck, what I will say is that this is an abbreviated version of the presentation that we gave to the Community Liaison Group, which met virtually through Zoom last Wednesday.
Perfect. Take it away, Martin.
Thank you very much. So I'll be just asking for the slide to be advanced when it's the next time. So you can go to the next slide. I'll be giving you a brief overview and a bit of context into the state of the project just for this slide, and then I'll be handing it over to Sonja Strynatka. She's going to talk about the technical work that has been completed now, and then, as Kyle mentioned before, he will be taking over and give us a bit of an update on the policy approaches and the work that we're doing on the policy development. So as we now in May 2020, it's actually been almost a year since we've been before council last time. It was actually June 10. I looked it up quickly, June 10, 2019, when we presented the draft risk assessment results. And we're now here to present the final concluding the technical work. So that concludes the risk assessment. You'll see here that we started quite a while ago, data collection, characterization, model development. Now we've got the risk assessment completed. We've also now completed the threats analysis and the climate change assessment, and Sonja will take you through those. So what we really now have is we have all the components together, ready, and all the technical insights to start with the next step, and that's the policy development. And I'd like to give you a little bit more context in terms of what Kyle will be talking about in terms of policy. We've started to look at, we call it policy approaches, so it's kind of the first step that we're taking in looking at how we can address the kind of results that we've been given through the technical work. And it's really the first step. It's a high-level overview. It looks at what is possible under the Clean Water Act. It kind of looks at what can be considered in terms of policy development, looks at other examples. And we need to also look in terms of the context about this is the project team that is now doing the work on behalf of the Source Inspection Committee. So really the Source Inspection Committee has delegated this work, policy development in this case, to the project team. So ultimately, once we got a good draft policies together, a set, it'll be the project team who will recommend those draft policies to the Source Inspection Committee. There'll be further steps in terms of revisions. There'll be public consultation as we move through updating the plan. So there will be further involvement from the public, and obviously also council updates that we can provide as we move through the process. But this is the kind of the first step in terms of the policy development, and Kyle will go to a little bit more detail about what we've done already on that front. So with that and a bit of context, I'll hand it over to Sonja Strynatka, who's going to give us the technical kind of update on where we are right now. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Can you move it over to the next slide, please? Thanks. So just to introduce myself, I'm Sonja Strynatka. I'm the senior hydrogeologist with the GRCA, and I've been involved with this study actually for the past 4 years, so right from the very beginning. So just to begin with a review of the risk assessment, this was completed about a year ago, and the risk assessment used the Tier 3 groundwater model to evaluate whether the current municipal water infrastructure supply could supply enough water to meet things such as the current population needs and future needs. It looked at what the water demands could meet municipal supply if there was a prolonged drought, and also with increased development. So for example, with more built up or impervious areas, this would mean less groundwater recharge into the aquifer system or the groundwater system. And then we also looked at whether there were impacts to natural heritage features such as cold water streams and provincially significant wetlands. So if you can move on to the next slide, please. So to do this evaluation, we applied a matrix such as this, where we had a standard set of scenarios that were applied to the groundwater model, and we looked at existing and future water demands, which are across the top of that matrix, and then we applied the scenarios that are listed down. So we looked at existing and future land use, average climate, and then drought conditions, and looked at the outcomes from that. So can you move on to the next slide, please? Thanks. So the results concluded that the current water supply system can meet future water demand until approximately 2031 to 2036 under average and drought climate conditions without impacts to the natural environment. It also concluded that with the current well infrastructure capacity, that this is insufficient to 2041 average day demand. And so this resulted in a significant risk level designation according to the provincial technical rules. And these results really represent a conservative screening level exercise. So next slide, please. So as we completed the risk assessment, we also delineated the wellhead protection area for quantity, or the WAPA-Q, as is shown on this slide. And this is really a conservative screening area that represents the area that may be affected by current or future pumping from both municipal and non-municipal wells. And water takings within the WAPA-Q It doesn't necessarily mean that these will affect the municipal water supply. It just means that there needs to be further study. So with the WAPAQ now defined, what we've done in the past year has moved on to complete a water quantity threats assessment to evaluate different water takers within the WAPAQ and their potential impact on the municipal supply. So next slide, please. So this was our approach to our water quantity threats assessment. So scenarios were developed, again, using our Tier 3 groundwater model to estimate the relative impact of different water takings on or areas of land use change, and looking at how these simulated water levels could impact the municipal supply wells. So for water takings, this flow chart is generally how we followed, where we took water takings and we separated them into municipal and non-municipal takings. And for the municipal wells, we looked at increased future pumping based on input from the water supply master plan. And for the non-municipal takings, these were then subdivided into permitted, non-permitted takings. And then we drilled down a little bit further for the non-permitted takings and looked at impacts from domestic takings and also livestock watering. Next slide, please. So the scenario results, the slide summarizes what we found. So when we looked at the various scenarios that I just outlined, what we found is that the largest influence on groundwater levels was by and far from municipal pumping to meet future population growth. So the numbers for that are 1.5 to 24.2 meters of aquifer drawdown. So the other scenarios that are listed here, so this includes domestic water wells, land development, so that represents a decrease in groundwater recharge, permitted water takings, permitted non-municipal water takings, and also livestock watering. These all had relatively minimal impacts to water levels when compared to increased municipal pumping. So once we had the water quantity threats assessment completed, we also looked at a climate change assessment for the Center Wellington area. So for this, our consultant used global climate models, also referred to as GCMs, for the Center Wellington area. And here we looked at, so there are many different GCMs, and we looked at a time period ranging from now up until the 2050s. And found that they project a range of higher precipitation and warmer temperatures. So if you look at this graph, you can see the gray dots. It's a whole range of different potential scenarios. So our consultants chose 10 scenarios, which are highlighted in the orange, so that we cover a range of combinations of increased precipitation and increased temperature. And then how we actually evaluated that was we took these 10 scenarios and we used, next slide, please. Thanks. So we used GRCA's hydrology model to simulate the change in groundwater recharge in response to these different GCMs. So what we found here is that recharge increased by 10 to 30% during winter and early spring months. And this was due to warmer winters, less frozen soil, and also increased precipitation. And we found that recharge is similar to what we currently have now in the late spring and in the fall months, with the lower recharge in the summer. So you can see that on the graph, where we have in the earlier months and through the summer, you can see there's where the recharge deviates and where it's very similar to what we have now. So from here, we had these 10 scenarios. That's okay. From these 10 scenarios, we then narrowed it down to 4 representative scenarios. And once we had these final 4 scenarios, we actually applied them to our groundwater model to look at how these combinations of increased temperature and precipitation would impact municipal groundwater levels. So the groundwater recharge rates, what we found were predicted to increase during the winter and early spring months, and this is because we've got the increased recharge. We also found groundwater levels were predicted to increase based on these model climate scenarios. So increased recharge, increased groundwater levels. And so ultimately, it was predicted that there was no climate change risk to the quantity of municipal groundwater supply to the 2050 timeline. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So the summary of key findings from the water quantity threats and the climate change assessment are summarized in this slide, and also their implications to policy development under the Clean Water Act. So what was summarized is that we should be focusing on the management and optimization of municipal water takings using insights from the Water Supply Master Plan. So looking at a decrease or how to decrease future demand using water conservation and demand management, but also increasing future supply through the optimization and redevelopment of existing wells and then also installing new wells. Secondly is to assess the potential interference with municipal wells to mitigate impacts from newer expanded non-municipal takings. Also to maintain recharge, groundwater recharge to support the existing water budget, water quality and ecological functions, and to consider ongoing groundwater model maintenance and funding, and to also consider maintaining a groundwater and surface water monitoring program. And lastly is that there is currently no predicted climate change risk to the quantity of municipal groundwater supply to the 2015 timeline horizon. So that is an abbreviated presentation of what we gave to our community liaison group last week. And from here, I'm going to pass it over to Kyle to talk about policy options.
Yeah, thank you, Sonja. So I've got a few slides to finish up, to bring you up to date on where we're at with the policy side of things. So as Sonja and Martin mentioned, the technical work is wrapping up, and then that feeds into the policy writing. So Martin had talked right at the beginning about the Source Protection Committee delegating the policy development to the project team, and the project team is staff, GRCA, Center Wellington staff, county staff. And we are working right now on the actual policy text, which would actually be the next update that we'll provide to you at a future date. And there's two threats when we talk about policies. The Clean Water Act prescribes a series of quality and quantity threats, and the two threats that we are dealing with is consumptive water taking and activities that reduce the groundwater recharge. And these would apply for both existing and future activities within the WAPQ. So I'm going to walk through policy approaches now, which is really the high-level overview of what is available under the Clean Water Act and how that interacts with other pieces of legislation. Next slide, please. So this is a map that shows you the Center Wellington WPQ, and the Center Wellington WPQ is predominantly contained within Center Wellington. However, there is a portion of it that goes into the southern part of Mapleton around Alma. You can see that on the top left of your screen. And there's a very small portion that extends into the township of Woolwich. Now, the Grand River Source Protection Plan is divided up into municipal chapters split out on the upper tier or county or regional levels. So the Grand River Source Protection policies for Center Wellington and Mapleton will be contained in the Wellington County chapter, which is what we're currently working on in terms of drafting. Any policies to protect the small sliver that's in Woolwich would actually be contained in the Regional Waterloo chapter. The other point I wish to make on this is that there is a small portion completely separate from this study, but there's a small portion of a WPQ in the town of Erin from Acton that's all in the Grand River Source Protection Plan area as well. That would also, the policies are also being written for in this update. Next slide, please. So this diagram shows you the link between the technical studies that Martin and Sonja just walked you through. So you see on the left-hand side of your screen, you see the Tier 3 water budget and the local area risk assessment, which goes through various stages of provincial and municipal peer review, as well as input from the community liaison group. We then get into the technical studies that we just presented and just wrapped up, which is the water quantity threats analysis and the climate change assessment. We just presented that to the CLG last week, and we're currently in the CLG input period right now. They have the next few weeks to provide input. There's also the green box on the bottom also refers to a discussion paper, which was written 2 years ago in 2018 for the Guelph Hermosa water quantity study. And this is a very common approach that the Lake Erie Source Protection Committee uses, especially in the Grand River watershed, where they write discussion papers on the different threats, on what's available, what are the available policy approaches or tools that are available, not only in the Clean Water Act, but also under other pieces of legislation. So we've used this discussion paper as a reference document, really, to help guide our next steps. And where we are right now on the right-hand side of your screen is the policy development, policy approaches and draft policies. So I'm presenting you the policy approaches today, and then draft policies we're currently working on. Next slide, please. So this diagram we like to show because it really illustrates the interconnections or the linkages between all the various pieces of legislation that protect water, and it's really a nested framework: federal, provincial, municipal. So right in the center, you'll see that SP quantity, and that stands for Source Protection Quantity, and that is, of course, the Tier 3 study that we're currently working on. And you can see how that little honeycomb in the center is abuts up against or connects against various other pieces of legislation, whether that be the Water Supply Master Plan and the Permit to Take Water, or the quality side of the Source Protection Program, which we won't talk too much about today, but that's on the left-hand side. And then the Safe Drinking Water Act license. It also connects to the Safe Drinking Water Act license, of course, as well, which the municipality maintains. So there's Permit to Take Water, there's the Water Supply Master Plan, there's the Class EA, and then there's also the Planning Act sides of it. And all of these pieces of legislation link together and feed into and can be used as tools under the Clean Water Act to protect the water quantity. And important point to note too is that a number of these tools are, although they're point-in-time studies, say the Water Supply Master Plan or the Tier 3 study, they're set up in a continuous improvement cycle similar to the quality management system that the Safe Drinking Water Act licenses operate under, where they can be improved upon and updated as information becomes available. Next slide, please. So now we're going to focus on the Clean Water Act tools. And the Clean Water Act tools this is the full toolbox that's available to us under the Clean Water Act. The first one is provincial regulatory approvals, which are prescribed instruments, and these are permits to take water predominantly. However, there is also for recharge reduction, which is the other threat, there are environmental compliance approvals that deal with that. There's also land use planning, and then education, outreach, and incentive programs. And the education, outreach, and incentive programs are really kind of a bread and butter tool. You see that for all the different threats, and they get used not only for quantity but also for quality. And I jumped over the land use planning, but I didn't mean to. The land use planning tools are an important tool as well, where we can talk and interact or intersect with the official plan study requirements for new developments, and make sure that those linkages between the new developments as they come in and the permits to take water if they need it, that approval process are strong. Moving down the list, you also have stewardship programs, best management practices, pilot programs, and specify actions. And I will give you a couple examples in another slide of what the specify actions are. But this is really, these are really sort of a multitude of tools. You can do water conservation, you can look at development review, standards, you can look at municipal well optimization, and a number of other things too. And then lastly, the Clean Water Act provides and makes the provision for, under Part 4, a series of new tools. Well, they're not as new now, but prohibition, risk management plan, and restricted land use. And this is really ties in directly to what I do on a day-to-day basis and what my staff do on a day-to-day basis. Now, these tools are listed here and they are options. However, I do want to point out that as they apply to water quantity, they haven't been used as much in other source protection plan policies that have been approved already for the water quantity policies. And we're going to go through that in the next slide. The next slide, please. So very first, we have permit to take water. We have permit to take water, and the policies are directing the Ministry of Environment to manage water takings that are significant drinking water threats using the permit to take water program. And this is really one of the preferred tools that the province has set up and would like us to use. This is a key approach used in other source protection plans that have been approved. And one of the goals of the Clean Water Act is not to duplicate regulatory processes. So since there is a permit to take water process in place, there is basically direction from the province to look to see how much we can use the permit to take water process in our policies, whether that be directing certain conditions or asking for certain conditions from the province. And if we move along to the next slide, please. Growth and development. So this is a mixture of planning tools as well as some of those specify action tools that I mentioned earlier. And these policies focus on earlier and stronger contemplation of water supply considerations in growth and development planning. So water resource availability need to be considered earlier in provincial growth forecasting and municipal planning processes. And that's an example of something that's already been used by other approved source protection plans with water quantity policies. We also have examples there of development maintaining existing recharge rates and overall better coordination with municipalities in the province. And we're just going to move on to the next one. Thank you very much. So municipal water, and these are also some examples of specific action or specify action. So municipal water supply management and planning processes should incorporate the Tier 3 studies, as well as water conservation, reinforcing some of the recommendations from the Water Supply Master Plan, and monitoring. And this actually ties into some of the results from the technical work that was done, where the increase in maintain groundwater and surface water monitoring to support future updates. This is actually one of the recommendations from the threats analysis as well. And then there's some other examples from approved plans of increased information sharing between municipalities and conservation authorities, and a request to the province for provincial funding. All of this work up until this time has been funded by the province. However, at this point, going forward, that doesn't look like that will be the case. The next slide, please. So, policy considerations. So that gave you a quick overview of the policy approaches that can be used, both the toolbox and what's been used previously in other source protection plans. This slide is really to outline for you some of the considerations that we as staff have to consider when we're writing and drafting the policy text, which is the stage that we're at right now. So one of the things we do need to consider is using the technical results, and Sonja walked through what those technical results were. Specifically for the WPQ. So therefore, you can see some differences between policies for, say, a WPQ here and a WPQ in Brant County or in Halton Region. Existing regulations are preferred, and this goes back to my point about the permit to take water and the use of prescribed instruments. The province really has given direction to avoid duplication of regulatory burden wherever possible. And lastly, in this list, prohibition is a last resort. So though it is there and it is a tool, it hasn't actually been used, to our knowledge yet, for water taking, for water quantity policies. Consistency within approved source protection plans where possible. This is referring to between the municipal chapters in the Grand River Plan. So it's not necessarily the text has to be consistent, but the overall approach should be consistent. And then precedent of approaches used in the existing source protection plan. So again, looking to see what's already been used, and again, there can be some differences based on technical results, but really overall looking to kind of carry on what's been approved and been used in the past, both within the source protection plan, and lastly, in the last bullet, or the second last bullet, with the neighboring source protection plan plans or chapters. And this is important for our consideration right now because of that piece of Acton where we're writing policies that cover the entire county. There are policies already existing in the Credit Valley portion of that Acton WPQ that's in the town of Erin. And then ultimately, it is a multi-pronged approach. There's various policies and a wide policy suite that can be used to address the problem, both water taking and recharge reduction. And the last slide, please. So in summary, this is a collaborative process of policy development, not only keeping council informed as we have been all along, but also between agencies and between municipalities. We're going to be presenting the same presentation to Mapleton tomorrow, as there's a portion that goes into Mapleton. And there's also the community engagement piece, which is unique to Wellington, both for this project and the Guelph Fairmosa project through the CLG. I've talked on the last slide about the policy development considerations, so I won't, just in interest of time, I'll skip over that. That's the third bullet there. And then we're drafting the policies, and once they are drafted, they'll be presented to CLG for feedback and to municipal councils for information and their feedback. And then once we get to this point, lastly, there would be the policies would be recommended to the Source Protection Committee for endorsement, and then released through the formal pre and public consultation periods, very similar to what we went through last year on the road salt, where we came to council ahead of time within the pre-consultation and allowed some time for feedback and consideration, and then it would be coming back to council for endorsement through a resolution at some point. Thank you very much, and we'll be happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Kyle. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Sonja. As we all know, nothing's as important as water in our municipality, so it's really, really good to know that we have such a high level of internal expertise when it comes to our water here at the Center of Wellington and across the county. So thanks, Kyle, and your team for the expertise that you bring to the table. Also very fortunate to have a partner with the GRCA as our partner on this project. So thanks, Martin and Sonja and your teams for being a big part of this project and for kind of steering this project along. I'm really excited that there was this much community engagement and support in this project. I know that was seen as a best practice, and Kyle has talked to the county about that as well as so thanks again. Turn the thing over to questions from council. We'll go around the virtual council table if you have any questions. Don't feel like you need to, but I'm just going to go around the table, starting with Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. No questions. Excellent report.
Thanks, Councillor Foster. Moving on to Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Thanks. No questions. I would like to say I'm glad of the approach that we're taking. It seems very concise, slow and detailed, and you can definitely see a lot of little steps put into the whole process, but we should come out with a good water taking plan and water conservation in the future as well on all of these things. So thank you for the report.
Councillor McElwain.
There we go. I do have a question. First of all, thank you for the report. It was really well done and clear. And quite often you lose me on your reports. So this time I was able to follow it, and that's a good news thing. You mentioned that the technical results were kind of a first line of policy making. But you also mentioned later in the second last slide, I guess it was, that it also interfaces with the water management plan, and that the results that presented from Tier 3 and the results presented from the water management plan have some fair differences based upon the capacity of our wells. So I'm just curious as to exactly what weight is put on which factor and how it's going to impact the final policy.
Kyle, you want to take that, or one of your colleagues? Kyle?
Sure, I can start, and then if Colin or Martin or Sonja want to jump in. In terms of the weight, I think what your question was the weight of the different factors when we're weighing the policies. So we try to weigh them all equally when we're looking at what policy approaches we should use and we should consider. So there are the technical results, and then there is also obviously the water supply master plan results too. So there is interaction, and there's been integration between those two studies all along, the Tier 3 study and the water supply master plan. So although there's I understand that there's some perceived differences in them, and I'll defer to Colin to kind of finish the answer off. The goal has been to integrate those two as closely as possible as we move along, so that at the end they're in sync with and then leading that into the policies.
Colin, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, through you, Mayor Linton. I would just add that so the water supply master plan has really looked at our future and the demands required to the planning horizon, the 2041 planning horizon. And whereas the Tier 3 looked at, does the capacity of our existing wells is there enough capacity in those wells to service our future growth? And as we know, the answer is no. We are going to be in a deficit situation in terms of capacity, and the Water Supply Master Plan does estimate the timing of that to be around 2026, which would be kind of a worst case scenario, but we want to get ready for that, and we do have the projects lined up in order to address that, what we see as an upcoming deficit in capacity. So the good news today, we do have sufficient capacity. We've got just over 1,700 units in the water supply system of available capacity, and that's using our 2019 data. But we're mindful that we want to have the next sources of capacity lined up. So F2 replacement well, F5 replacement well, and are really the two high priority projects as identified in the master plan. And then of course the groundwater exploration program. And so those are programs, especially the exploration program, that's going to take several years to get new capacity. But the kind of the low hanging fruit, if you will, would be the kind of the F5 and F2 replacement wells, looking at additional capacity at those two locations. So hopefully, Councillor McElwain, that answers your question.
Mr. McElwain, did that answer your question, or do you have a follow-on?
Thanks, Kelly. I think it answered my question. There is the Water Supply Master Plan kind of identifies 2026 as where we can run into problems, and as you say, it is a worst case scenario, but it is potential that we should be planning for, whereas the Tier 3 study says that we're good out until like 2036. And that's a large gap, and I just want to make sure that any policy coming forward and presented to the government is referencing our worst case scenario, which is what we have to plan for, versus the best case scenario of 2036.
Yeah.
Kyle, did you want? Oh, Colin, you have this?
Yeah, if I can add it, maybe I'll hand it off to Kyle.
Okay.
So we really have, when we're measuring the available capacity in the water supply system, there's really two metrics that we look to. One is maximum day capacity. So that's kind of our worst case scenario, the highest demands in a given year. So that's the one day of the year that we definitely want to make sure we have capacity for that. The other one is average day capacity. So in our current permit to take water, we do have an average day limit. And so when Matrix or Sonja did refer to the 2031 to 36 time frame, that's based on the average day taking. So that's a much longer. So from an average daily water taking basis, we're in much better shape. But from a max day, to have that kind of 1 day capacity available for when things are really high, that would be the 2026 date. So, but yeah, great point. It's a common point of confusion as we're talking about those two different metrics for water supply capacity. And Kyle,
thanks for that clarification. I'll turn over to Kyle. You wanted to add to that?
Yeah, just a quick addition to that in terms of policy. So yes, the Tier 3 policy, or the policy writing, will then take direction from both the Tier 3 study and the Water Supply Master Plan study. So both will get referenced, and really the Tier 3 study, given the difference that Colin just outlined, would really take its direction on the max day side of things from the Water Supply Master Plan, because that's where that analysis was completed, versus the average day capacity side of things, which was in the Tier 3. So that's where the linkages that I was talking about would come in, and to make sure that then the policy kind of links both together, and often will refer back to recommendations made in the Water Supply Master Plan.
Great, thanks for that clarification. Councillor Kittredge.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question. In this presentation, I guess Martin is who I'm addressing the question to. you say that the technical analysis is finished. I was understanding that there was more to be studied and to complete this, but we just ran out of funding. Is that true, or is that not valid?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor Linton. The short answer is no. I'm not aware of any further technical studies that we would be needing to do right now. We've done the actual tier 3. So that's the final risk assessment. The 2 additional studies that have been added on, that's the threats analysis and the climate change assessment. And both of those have been funded through the province, and we're completing those. So right now, we're really just wrapping those things up, and there's no additional technical work that needs to be done for this project.
Any follow-on to that, Councillor Kittredge? Okay. Councillor Dunsmore?
I have no questions. I just wanted to thank staff for their hard work. It was a very detailed report, and I look forward to hearing its finished product.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I have a couple of questions or comments. I guess the first one is, in the slide you referenced assessing the potential interference with municipal wells to mitigate impacts from new or expanded wells. I guess one concern I have is the geographic separation of our municipal wells. Senator Wellington's operational history and experience indicates our municipal wells should have a minimum 2-kilometer separation to avoid municipal well interference and to provide an appropriate recharge area consistent with the Tier 3 assumption that wells are mainly locally recharged. So looking back at our history, wells E2 and F3 were abandoned in part due to proximity and interference with other municipal wells. So I guess I'm going back to, why are we investing money in bringing F2 online when it is only 500 meters from F1 and 1,200 meters from F4? So I'm just wondering, will you be looking at F2 further as to whether or not it could provide some negative impact to our existing municipal wells and the ability for us to get the flows that the Tier 3 is predicting? So that's my one question. So,
that sounds like a Colin question to me. Maybe let's cover that off first, then I'll go back to you, Councillor McCray. Colin?
Great. Thanks, and through you, Mayor Linton. Yeah, no, that's a good point. F2 is certainly it's offline currently, as we all know, and the intention there is to really do an assessment. So hydrogeological study first before any new well is brought online at that location, and so we really need to assess the aquifer at that location. So and do a small scale pumping test, confirm water quality at that location. So there's a number of steps that we're going to take just to verify, that there's not any sort of unacceptable impacts or interference with other locations. But it's again seen as kind of low-hanging fruit. It is a current well that's in our permit. We do have the property. It's right beside the existing distribution system. But certainly, you're quite right, Councillor McCray, that there's a number of things that need to be verified in terms of interference, in terms of water quality at that location, before it would be connected to the municipal system. So, it was felt and recommended through the Water Supply Master Plan that it would be worth taking those initial steps of assessment to see whether or not it's worth connecting that location.
Thanks, Colin. Councillor McCray, second question there.
thank you, Colin. I guess just related to what you were saying there, and maybe this question, well, I'll be bringing it up again a little further in our meeting, but looking at Table 3 in our Water Supply Master Plan, it's talking about having F5 well replacement in place for 2019, because it's projecting that we're going to need the water a lot sooner than what we're talking about 2026. it also mentions that F2 should be online by 2021, 2022. So I'm just sort of wondering, what is the target year that we should be aiming for getting more water supply?
So I'll tackle that one. So yeah, it's I do see the table that you're referring to, and really that's part of the implementation plan to secure additional water supply capacity, and it sets out kind of a staged, phased process of various projects to bring them online, to bring that additional capacity online. And again, I would refer back to that 2026 number is really when, is that target time frame when we're projected to be running a deficit in terms of our maximum day demand. So really, we're trying to get these projects lined up and online before that 2026 time frame. So the master plan is presented, here's the recommended timing in order to secure additional capacity in order to avoid that future deficit in 2026. And here's the order, here's the priority of projects that should be implemented. But I would say that 2026 is that with our current capacity, that's the limitation at this point. But as we secure additional capacity, hopefully that gets pushed off and becomes a further down the road issue as additional capacity comes online. So hopefully that's clarified things. Yeah.
Thank you. If I may ask one question of Kyle?
Go ahead, Councilor McCray.
Kyle, I'm just curious, in terms of the WIPA-Q areas, if we've identified a certain WIPA-Q area, if somebody was proposing to put in a high-capacity well, would there be further restrictions because it is within a WIPA-Q area?
Thank you, Councilor McCray. Through you, Mayor Linton. So the WIPA-Q should be considered as a conservative screening area. So the purpose would be to flag that, and I'm assuming when you're asking the question, it's a taking that's greater than 50,000 liters. Yes. That would require a permit to take water. So the intent of the area is to screen that for both municipal and provincial staff and flag it. So then in the permit to take water assessment and review that gets completed by provincial staff, that the appropriate terms and conditions can be added. And then how we fit in on the policy is we write some policies directed to the province on permits to take water, where we can recommend specific conditions that we would like to see in a broad sense in the policy, and also outline some suggestions on communications and collaboration, so that the two processes, the municipal process and the permit to take water process are talking to each other when that development application comes in. Because I'm assuming that there's also some requirement, possibly some requirement for municipal approval as well. So you'd want those two things connected. So that's what we're looking at in the policies. So conditions for the prescribed instrument policies, which would then provide direction to the province on their end, and then also planning policies that provide some study requirements and things of that nature on our end, assuming that it needs a development approval of some sort.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Colin. Thanks very much, Kyle and Martin and Sonja. There's no action to take right now. This is for information only at this point. So again, thanks for joining us today. Moving on to the next item on our agenda is the my county council report, and there has been a lot going on, so I'll try to bring you up to speed on some of the things that we've been doing at a county level. We continue to participate in 3 weekly county emergency operations team meetings, and that's probably going to be moving down to a couple starting next week. The focus of those county meetings is determining how our county staff can safely go back to work when the province directs us to open up. So every facility is a little bit different, and we have to make sure that we have the right kind of PPE in place for the staff, as well as the physical barriers and the other kind of things that go along that we're all getting used to whenever we go anywhere. So that's the process that all the county departments are going in right now. As far as our capital projects, all the ones that have been budgeted for are moving forward. So that's good. Library is now providing online orders and curbside pickup. So that is making the library staff very happy. They have something at the library to do again. Transfer stations are opening this week. Same days, same hours at each of the locations as before. They are requesting debit credit payment. They don't want to be dealing with cash, and physical distancing measures will be put in place. Our citizens can expect delays this week especially. And if possible, we're asking, and if councillors can help me with this and help the county with this, encourage residents to go during the weekday, because we're expecting Saturdays, especially in Elora and Bellwood, are going to be really, really busy. So, well, not Bellwood because it's not open yet, but Elora is going to be really busy. So encourage people to kind of go off hours if they can. So that's good news that we're moving ahead with that. Childcare services is expanding based on some pretty rigid rules that are being set up by the province about what occupations are the most essential. So this is going to be one of the challenges that we're going to be facing at the county, and a lot of parents with young children are having a really, really hard time right now, and that's going to continue for a while. But we're trying to balance off the safety for the children and the staff with the ability of parents to actually go back to work. So this is a real, real tough balance, but things are moving ahead pretty quickly on the childcare front. The Wellington Terrace is now out of outbreak status, which is really good. All tests have now come back negative, so there's no breakout. There was just because there was one test outstanding, it was called an outbreak, and that's been removed. So that's really, really good news considering what's going on across Canada when it comes to long-term care facilities. So the Wellington Terrace staff and the director there have been doing a really, really good job. And so really proud of what the group is doing there and all the staff there. They're doing a great job there. As far as our county council meeting in June, it'll be another virtual meeting. We're doing conference calls at the county level, but we will be allowing for in-person committee meetings next month. If councillors choose to do so, there'll be physical distancing in place, and all the committee meetings will be happening in the council chamber. So there'll be lots of space in between. Public won't be able to come to them, and we're going to continue with doing the phone in, the conference call at the same time. So any councillors who don't want to come in, don't feel safe coming in, they can call just like we're doing in there. So that's happening, and we're also wearing masks and visors at these meetings. So my feeling was that a lot of county staff are going back to work with the proper personal protective equipment in place, so it made sense for their leaders to go back to work as long as we can make sure that we're all safe. So I'm confident with the approach that the staff has put together at the county that we can do so in a safe manner. So that's what's going to happen in June. And as you know, the county established a $1 million emergency fund called Keep Well, Business Sustainability Fund, and that was to provide much needed relief funding to our local businesses in the county. And we pushed through, this is an example of moving quickly, we pushed this relief fund out in record time. Basically within a week of the idea coming, we had monies in the hands of local county businesses. So this is very, very important to help provide some cash flow because it is taking a while for businesses to be able to go through the application process for federal and provincial funds. So there was a bit of a gap there, and that was the purpose of the Keep Well Fund. So a few numbers on that one: $967,000 of low interest loans were approved to 73 companies. Of those, 39 came from Centerwide. It supported 311 jobs across the county, and the average loan was just over $13,000. So this is a 3% interest rate. And so the fund did the job that we wanted to do. It quickly put money in the hands of local companies to keep the lights on, and when their cash flow ended. So I know a lot of Center Wellington companies were very happy that we went through that process. And wanted to thank our community teachers, Rick Whitaker and his team in Center Washington here and in the more southern county jurisdictions. And then in the north, the Saugeen Development Corporation was instrumental in using their process to go through these applications in a very quick and streamlined manner. So they were great partners to have. And now the provincial and the federal programs have kicked in, so I can't anticipate we're going to be doing too much action with the Keep Well Fund. It did its job as a stopgap measure, and I think now most of the businesses are on to other programs right now. We're also continuing our once-a-week calls with the 7 county mayors and CAOs. We continue to share information and try to work together as much as we can. Try to be as consistent as we can across the county in our approach and what we're doing as far as our services. When it comes to COVID-19 outbreak, it's been really, really good, and a lot of good teamwork has gone on at the county level. And it's good to see the CAOs, the treasurers all working together, the mayors working together, and try to be as consistent as possible. Obviously, we're going to have to deviate from time to time from municipality to municipality. But there has been a lot of good communication, a lot of sharing of good practices across the county, and it's something that I'd like to see continue because it's worked really well, and appreciate having the support of the 7 mayors, of the 6 mayors across the county right now. That's kind of something that's worked really well. So that's kind of the update on the county side. We're trying to get as much information out on through the Washington Advertiser and social media and radio, because a lot of these things are changing on the fly. And I know it's tough to get the timely information out to people, but we're doing as good of a job as I think we can on that front. Okay, moving on to confirmation of the agenda. We have a recommendation to the Council of the Township of Center Washington confirm the agenda for its meeting held May 25th, 2020. Have a mover for that? Councillor McCray, seconded by Councillor Dunsmore. Any opposed? And that is carried. Moving on to item 5, the confirmation of the minutes. We have council minutes from May the 4th, and I have a recommendation that the minutes of the council meeting held May 4th, 2020 be adopted as circulated. Mover for that recommendation, please. Councillor McElwain, second by Councillor Dunsmore. Any opposed? And that is carried. We have no delegations today. Consideration of reports. We have Integrity Commissioner Investigation General Indemnification Bylaw. I'm going to turn things over initially to our Township Clerk. Oh no, she wants to turn it right over to Kevin. Okay. We're turning things over to Kevin from CV Law. Thanks, Kevin, for your indulgence and sticking with a few of the earlier agenda items to be with us today. So I'll turn it over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Mayor Linton, and good afternoon, members of council. As you recall, back in January, council directed staff to bring forward a report regarding potential reimbursement for legal costs that any member of council incurs responding to an integrity commissioner investigation. So we were asked to review this request, to prepare a report, and also prepare the draft bylaw, which we've now done. So as you'll note in the report, it was included in the agenda. We did review a number of comparable municipalities to see what the general trend is when it comes to reimbursement for IC investigations in particular. And what we found is that the vast majority of comparable municipalities don't have any sort of standalone reimbursement policy, procedure, or bylaw. What most municipalities do have is a general indemnification bylaw, which is generally worded broadly enough that it would capture any kind of a request for legal reimbursement for IC investigations. And so what we started to do was craft a bylaw that was more along the lines of a general indemnification bylaw. To us, it didn't make a lot of sense to have a standalone reimbursement policy strictly for IC investigations when there's a whole host of other situations that councillors could potentially find themselves incurring personal legal costs by virtue of them holding public office. And so it really made more sense to look at this holistically develop an overarching policy framework through a bylaw that would address not just IC investigations, but would broadly address any number of situations that councillors may find themselves in. And that's sort of more in line, the lines with the going trend in comparable municipalities. Now, what we did a little bit differently here is, given that the request was initially spurred by an IC investigation, we have an overarching policy that deals with any request for reimbursement where a councillor incurs legal costs by virtue of holding office. But we also have a separate section dealing specifically with IC investigations. And there's some monetary thresholds in there that allow routine minor amounts to be processed by the clerk, with higher amounts coming back to council for a closed session, excluding the councillor that's making the request if the request is more in the extraordinary nature. And the idea behind this comprehensive bylaw is to ensure that there's consistency between any kind of reimbursement, there's predictability, there's equity amongst councillors going forward, so that there's a stable framework within which anyone knows if I'm going to go out and incur legal costs, this is the framework that I need to fit within if I'm seeking reimbursement after the fact from the municipality. So just in sum, the bylaw generally does two things. It provides a general indemnification for legal fees incurred. For example, if you were sued by virtue of holding public office because of a decision that council made. And then secondly, it carves out a specific set of provisions for legal fee reimbursement for IC investigations. A couple of things it specifically does not cover, and this is general practice across the board. It doesn't cover anything arising from the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. It doesn't cover any proceeding whereby a member is suing the township or vice versa. It doesn't deal with any grievances under a collective bargaining agreement. And any action or proceeding that was commenced under the Municipal Elections Act, where you are acting in a capacity as a candidate for office as opposed to a sitting member of council, that's explicitly excluded. So if there's an issue with campaign finances and a proceeding is commenced, that's not something that's captured by this. There's those sorts of situations that are carved there, but by and large, it's meant to be a general indemnification bylaw to cover situations that may arise by virtue of holding office. And so I'm certainly not missing the fact that this request came in as a result of the Integrity Commissioner report from January. And so just to probably head off a question that may come, if this bylaw were to be passed as it's presently drafted, and a request was made for legal reimbursement for costs from the responding council member from that report, my advice to staff would be that if it's below the $2,500 threshold, that should just be paid out forthwith to that council member. And that would be done administratively, as this bylaw currently has a $2,500 threshold for minor requests for reimbursement. And so with that, I will turn it over to you, Mayor Litton, to see if there's any Q&A. I'd be answering questions.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for this. I'm going to provide an opportunity for all members of council to speak to this motion, of course. While the Integrity Commissioner received several complaints about the same action, it was my complaint that the Integrity Commissioner decided to act on. I don't know why he chose to address only my complaint, but however, that was the case, and it makes sense for me then to speak about this matter first today, and then I'll pass it over to other members of council who will go around the room. Before I start, though, I want to make it clear that we're not talking about this Integrity Commissioner matter, again, because I want to do that. For this item on our agenda, the January 27th, Council directed staff to bring forward this motion. And as for the other Integrity Commissioner items on our agenda today and on our previous council meeting at the beginning of May, these matters are on our agenda because of motions that were put forward by other members of council. Personally, I much prefer to spend our valuable time together discussing things that matter more to our community. But it is what it is. At the end of January, we had a council meeting the 27th, and unfortunately, I was in the hospital for 5 days with a staycation, and I wasn't able to attend, and that was unfortunate. because it was my complaint to the Integrity Commissioners among several that were received about the same incident that triggered this process. So it was at this January the 27th meeting where council directed staff to consider reimbursing the costs for councillors involved in Integrity Commissioner investigation. And if I would have been able to participate in that meeting, I would have said many of the things that I'm going to touch on right now. So while I appreciate the expertise of Kevin and CV Law, the involved legal jargon in the cover letter and the bylaw overshadow the events that triggered this investigation in the first place. So I think it would be valuable for me to publicly speak to the actions I took in order to provide some context to how I will be voting on this matter in front of us today. So firstly, I didn't embark on this course of action to engage the Integrity Commissioner without serious and significant consideration. It was the last straw for me after years of what I considered questionable behavior from a member of council. So I was hoping that we could start fresh in 2019 with a new term of council. And that's why I pushed for several team building sessions and education sessions, and engaging Juice to do some team building training was one of those activities. Unfortunately, these team building sessions didn't help. So a couple comments that were made by the Integrity Commissioner in his report provides a reason why some team building efforts that have worked for many, many municipalities across the country have not worked for us here in Central Wellington. So I refer to page 12 in the Integrity Commissioner's report. The Integrity Commissioner states, my own dealings with the respondents reveal, and therefore I find as a fact that he can be accusatory, challenging, and argumentative, in addition to being prolix. Page 13 of the same report, and I quote, it is very clear that the respondent rejects the concept of team that is promoted by the mayor, and to my understanding, supported by other members of council. This is not conjecture. The respondent has openly and repeatedly documented his position that municipal councils should not operate as a team because, in his opinion, the team concept can thwart individual representation and stifle dissent. And that, in a nutshell, is the primary reason that we have not been able to build a cohesive council team in this term of council. We just can't have a cohesive leadership team without a basic understanding that we can be respectful and professional and still disagree with each other. This lack of respect and professionalism from all of us has resulted in our council meetings, our discussions, and our decisions being much more difficult and time-consuming. It's consumed way too much of our time and effort for both councillors and members of our staff team. And it does not give the public confidence in their elected leaders. So, following our failed team activities and after a series of what I thought were inappropriate emails and comments made both at council and in a public forum on the June 13th, 2019 email was the last straw for me. It was the last straw for me primarily because this councillor alleged, without any evidence, that individuals who financially donated to my 2018 election campaign were rewarded with positions on our advisory committees. This is a very serious accusation. This baseless accusation was sent to a few hand-picked members, former and current members of council, and targeted members of the public. In my mind, this email was defamatory and malicious, and completely lacking of any accuracy. But I chose not to stoop to that level and not publicly react to the slanderous comment. I did not want to add further embarrassment to our council with the public. Instead, I followed an appropriate process and submitted a formal complaint to the Integrity Commissioner. I invested significant personal time to pull together the documentation required to demonstrate the lack of evidence to support the accusation leveled against me in the June email. In his report, the Integrity Commissioner has completely vindicated me of any wrongful doing. On pages 3, 12, and 17 of his report, he confirms that he absolutely finds no evidence that campaign contributions influence appointments to advisory committees, period. However, despite determining that this claim against me was completely without any merit, the Integrity Commissioner ruled that it is not his place to, quote, interfere in the political debate of this nature, and that he is reluctant to silence the criticism. So although I am disappointed in how the Integrity Commissioner has interpreted his role in this particular case, I accept his ruling. If it was up to me, we wouldn't even be talking about this right now. We have much more important matters to be discussing. As far as the proposed indemnification bylaw to reimburse legal costs incurred by an individual councillor because of complaints filed against them, I'd only be in favor of such a bylaw if the complaint was that was filed was declared by the Integrity Commissioner as being frivolous, vexation, or in bad faith. I'd never support a bylaw that would have a taxpayer reimburse a member of council just because that person had to invest time and money that was a direct result of their initial malicious behavior. So sorry for the lengthy discussion, but because I cannot participate in the original meeting back at the end of January, I felt I owed the rest of the council and the public some explanation. So that's my comments, and I'll move on to the rest of the council. If you have any questions for Kevin, or if you have any comments about this, I will we will get into that discussion right now. Moving over to Councillor Foster first.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a number of comments. Will we be having a second round, Kelly, of going around the ring?
Yeah, we'll have procedure. We'll do the same thing as we've been doing. We'll go around twice, and then after the second time, I'll call for the vote, and then just vote at that point. I don't want you to have it start a third time of talking. Right. So 2 rounds and then the vote. Okay, Councillor Foster.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Well, a couple of comments. I was quite surprised to learn that there was actually 5 complaints filed at more or less the same time. The same moment in time, and one cannot help but wonder who were these people that filed these 5 complaints, and because they were all occurred at roughly the same moment in time, it certainly appears that the 5 people were acting together, acting in concert against Councillor Kittredge, and I find that very, very disturbing. Secondly, I note that all the complaints were discharged by the Integrity Commissioner. Effectively, Kittredge was found to be not guilty on all of these complaints except for one very minor email misdemeanor. I also note that I personally asked for the costs of these reports and the costs of the invoices as early as mid-March, early March, in fact. And despite repeated requests for public information on these costs, my requests were denied. And eventually the number of 8,000 was tabled at our our May 4th meeting, when in fact today's report shows that the costs were far in excess of 8,000. In fact, the total cost of all invoices are $16,500. And that, Mr. Mayor, is at the very best, it's misleading. And at the worst, it shows me that facts were being concealed on purpose on this matter. And that, too, is very troubling. And finally, I note that the purpose of this motion was to reimburse Councillor Kittredge for his legal costs. And under common law, as I spoke to in the meeting in January, it is common practice in the British parliamentary system to award costs in cases where a person effectively wins the case or is found to be not guilty or is otherwise, the complaints were discharged in this case. So it is both appropriate and reasonable and common practice in Westminster democracies to reimburse costs. And that's the matter we ought to be discussing. And I do have a question as well for Kevin, if I could, Mr. Mayor.
Sure, go ahead.
Kevin, can you hear me okay, first of all?
Yes, I can.
Thank you. My question, Kevin, you spoke to us about the general indemnification bylaw. And my own view is that I cannot help but wonder if it's appropriate that staff legal costs should be dealt with in a general indemnification bylaw. It seems to me that's sort of in breach of the common law principles dealing with cost awards, but more importantly, it overrides the concept of vicarious liability. Could you speak to that, Kevin, in particular in terms of vicarious liability and the employer's responsibility for the conduct of their employees?
Kevin, before you answer that question, can you also answer the statement that was made that clarifies the difference between this process with the Integrity Commissioner and other legal processes?
Sure, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I can answer those together. Certainly, I take no issue with the comment, Councillor Foster, that in a traditional court system where one party is victorious, they are awarded all or some of their legal costs by the so quote-unquote losing party in that proceeding. But what we have here in the case of Integrity Commissioner investigations is it's not a proceeding, it's not a court or tribunal setting, it's not an adversarial process in the traditional sense. It's a process, it's an investigative process, unless the commissioner decides to actually hold an inquiry. And they do have the power to call a commission of inquiry to actually call witnesses and adjudicate in a more formal setting. But the vast majority of the time, what they do is just they do an investigation and prepare a report. And the report contains recommendations to council. And it's council that actually decides what to do with that report. The Integrity Commissioner could find a breach of the code of conduct, and council may decide that notwithstanding that breach, no action will be taken. And so the decision really rests with council as a whole as to what to do with the results of that investigative report. So it's quite a bit different than the traditional court process whereby there are winners and losers and costs are awarded. So that sort of is the first point I wish to address. Secondly, your question is why are we including staff in this? And what about vicarious liability? Generally speaking, of course, employers are responsible vicariously for the actions or omissions of their employees while they're exercising their duties. There's also the potential, of course, there's an insurance policy that also covers over actions where employees might be negligent in their duties from day to day. So what we're dealing with here in this is really potentially situations that are outside the scope of our general insurance policy that would cover employees. We're talking about situations, for example, where both council members and employees are perhaps named personally in a lawsuit as a result of actions that they are carrying out in their day-to-day activities. And that typically what we're talking about in these situations are frivolous or vexatious lawsuits whereby personnel are personally named in a lawsuit. Usually they're dismissed summarily and quite quickly, at least as against the individuals in their personal capacity, but they may incur legal costs in doing that. And traditionally, that's been done on an ad hoc basis. If an employee was named, for example, the chief building official will be named regularly in court applications dealing with building permit matters. That's the standard practice. And they're, of course, indemnified by the township, notwithstanding the fact that they are personally named. And so what we're really doing through this by having staff included is we're formalizing a process that's already done on an ad hoc basis and is already by and large covered by insurance in some cases as well. So it's really not expanding the scope of the coverage that staff would enjoy by virtue of their employment to begin with. I hope that answers the question.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks. So reading through this and looking at the situation, I really see two matters before us today. And I really like that we're bringing this across as a general indemnification kind of idea where we touch on the fact that there's many different areas where a counselor or someone doing their duty and their task may happen to need to take out legal advice. So the bylaw itself is a very it is a bylaw speaking about all matters moving forward, but we also have a little bit of a conversation happening here about what's happened in the past. So I like that we're moving with a bylaw that covers all things. I do think though that with this bylaw it makes it very difficult because inside of it speaks towards pre-authorization, conversations about how do we get how the counselor or any other person would act in the process, which doesn't help with the topic moving backwards. So in general, towards the main focus of what this presentation or this indemnification bylaw is, I think it's a good idea that we work towards getting there. Moving backwards on the topic, I think we need to flush that out a little more as to what that looks like. Are we talking about how we would deal with one particular case, which steps us outside of this particular general indemnification one? Because we would need to make a specific ruling, I guess, or bylaw to deal with that, because of all the restrictions that are put into here. Clearly, there was, as Councillor Foster said, there was multiple complaints. So there was something there, and that surprises me how many complaints there were. So it just goes to show. But this bylaw per se would have to somehow speak towards backwards as well. So I'd like to hear what some of the other councillors say in order to how we can deal with that one as well. There's two cases before us, I think.
Councillor McElwain?
Can you hear me now? Okay. My little signal thing in the corner is missing, so I couldn't unmute. Okay, first of all, I'm surprised the direction this discussion has gone, because it certainly isn't following the direction of the actual motion, which was to discuss this proposed bylaw. And so getting into big discussion about the actual Integrity Commissioner's report wasn't part of what I was prepared for at all. And so I'm not sure why we went that way. But as far as this bylaw is concerned, I guess my comments are that I don't believe that it should be covering the respondent as well, it should only be covering the respondent who has had to defend himself or herself against a charge, and it should not be compensating the person who brought the charge forward. I can't see that there's a requirement for legal counsel there anyhow, but I don't think it should be included in the document that that person is being compensated. I think it just gives another opportunity for that person to say, oh, it doesn't cost me anything, so I may as well take it to court because I didn't agree with the Integrity Commissioner or whichever ruling body we're talking about. So I think it's not really addressing the issue that we were originally trying to address here. And I guess other than that, as I say, I didn't expect to get into a long discussion about the Integrity Commissioner's report. That's already been dealt with 4 months ago. So that's the end of my comment for this.
Mr. Kitchus?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to start by echoing Councillor McElwain's initial comments. We've strayed from the agenda, and it has been the chairperson and presiding officer that has done that. We are deciding a policy, a general policy, that was created by the lawyer, Kevin Thompson from SA Law, who's our municipal lawyer. And it's a general, and that's the only reason why I can participate at this time. And we are not deciding compensation. He alluded to making comments about that, and that would require me leaving this meeting at this present time. But as he said, council does decide that on a separate issue. So it would require any discussion of that, which has already been initiated by the mayor and also Councillor Van Leeuwen, would have to be a closed meeting, and I would have to not be in that meeting. But as it is standing right now, I do have a few questions. I was wondering how much this report, this is for the lawyer, Kevin Thompson. How much did this report cost and the outline for the bylaw? That's my first question. My second question is, is the provision in the indemnity bylaw allow for challenging the integrity commissioner's report and being compensated to challenge that? That's my second question. And if you could answer those, then I'll go further.
So is that, the first question is for our clerk. Is that going to come at a future date, how much this costs?
Through you, Mayor Litton, as a rule, invoices do not come before council. I can certainly look up that information. If SB Law has already submitted the invoice, it could certainly be looked up. But at this point, I do not have that information in front of me.
That's good enough for this meeting then. And turning it over to Kevin to answer the second part of that question.
And I can clarify as well, our final invoice has not yet been issued, so when that's done, a future request could be made, and we'll assess at that time. In terms of whether a councillor would be reimbursed if they were to challenge the Integrity Commissioner's report, the way you would challenge an Integrity Commissioner's report is to seek a judicial review of the findings, the recommendations of the report, and that goes before Superior Court of Justice, and costs at that level are highly discretionary upon the judge. And so the judge will typically make findings. This bylaw does, as drafted, deal with cost reimbursement up to a monetary threshold for some of those legal costs that are incurred. But again, whether you actually incur costs at that level depends on what decision the judge hearing the case makes. And so it's not guaranteed that just by challenging the decision of the Integrity Commissioner's report is going to be overturned on appeal, and there may or may not be an award of cost at that level. So it may be that pursuing an appeal means you're pursuing a lot out of your own pocket.
Councillor Dunsmore?
I think Councillor Kittredge had a follow-up question first, Mr. Mayor.
That's okay. We have, we're going to go around again anyway, so.
Okay, then I'll go. So I'll speak in favor of this motion. It's a regrettable situation that this council is so badly broken that we are here. I think it's going to be needed for a lot of councillors, because you can listen to the dissent that's here already, the lack of trust that's come out. Councillor Foster mentioned 5 complaints. Councillor Foster didn't miss an opportunity to foster a conspiracy theory here by turning around and saying that must mean that 5 councillors got together at a meeting and decided to act in concert. He then goes on to accuse staff of a crime, which is concealing information. I believe we all received our information at the same time. You see several different dates on the Integrity Commissioner's invoices. So waiting to get all the information before applying it is not something that would be unusual. The way we talk to each other, the way we go for the jugular on this, I can see more complaints coming down. I don't want to use the Integrity Commissioner. I don't like to use the Integrity Commissioner. I think we can sit down and talk this out and actually get along a little bit better, but it seems that there are some people that don't want to do that. So, hey, Kevin, I want to thank you for the work that you put into this. I think it's a good bylaw, and it's regrettable that we're here, but I think this is something we need to put forward.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Focusing solely on the bylaw before us and ignoring the history around it, I believe the bylaw is well written and addresses a gap in our legislative bylaws that protects councillors and staff who unknowingly cross the line or whose actions are misinterpreted. So I think this is a missing bylaw that is well needed for our community. So without looking at anything around it, I think this is something that we need. Just in terms of what I heard, I'd just like to say what is past is past. Let's talk about moving forward as a team. Now it's time to look forward and not back and accept the lessons we've all learned from the previous incidents that have happened, and let's look at how can we move forward as a collective group of individuals elected to represent our constituents without all the infighting. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, councillors. Moving, Councillor Foster, any additional comments?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I simply noted that 5 complaints were filed, Neil, against the same person at roughly the same moment in time, and you can call it a conspiracy theory if you wish, but the facts are the facts. Res ipsa loquitur. Secondly, I did ask for this information, and it was like pulling teeth to get it. Once again, you can allege something that doesn't exist if you wish, Neil, but I asked for straight up information and it was never forthcoming. So I'm disappointed that you'd make such an allegation that I'm suggesting conspiracy, Neil. Nevertheless, I think this matter ought to be councillors only and not staff. The employees and staff are already covered, as Kevin has noted, both through insurance, and they're also covered under the principle of vicarious liability. So they simply don't need to be included in this bylaw. This bylaw was intended to be very specific and help and cover councillors who have to defend themselves against Integrity Commissioner complaints. That was always the initial intention. And as a result, I'm speaking against a general indemnification bylaw for those reasons. And Mr. Mayor, I'd like to call for a recorded vote on this issue when the time comes to call the vote.
Okay, Councillor Foster. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thanks through you, Mayor. Yeah, I guess looking at the bylaw itself, I appreciated that it did cover everything and didn't speak only to one piece. So I think that it is an essential piece of bylaw. And I think that each municipality probably creates one once they run into an issue, and here we are today. So I'm in favor of that. I do have a question. It did stem from a situation, and I do have a question on next steps, especially, and I'm sure that Councillor Kittredge and others maybe are wondering too, what are the next steps in regards to moving forward with Councillor Kittredge's request, or that? So, because that does interest me, council should know from here what then happens. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Van Leeuwen, and through you, Mr. Mayor, I can address that. So the bylaw sets out a framework for how Integrity Commissioner reimbursement requests are made. If this bylaw were passed, and if a request for reimbursement were to come in, then staff would assess it in consultation with myself or another lawyer, to determine whether it meets the qualifications in the bylaw. As drafted, there are some monetary thresholds that have been put in there. So if the request is below the monetary threshold and the request otherwise complies with the criteria in the bylaw, then staff are given the authority through this bylaw as drafted to simply make the reimbursement request to the requesting council member. If it's above the monetary threshold, then the request goes into a closed session whereby that council member making the request is excluded, and the other members will debate whether there's eligibility and the quantum of costs they wish to reimburse to that council member.
Thank you for that clarification, Kevin. And just to be sensitive about Councillor Kittredge's potential conflict of interest, so we do have to be careful that we don't go into having a discussion about that. But it sounds like another process would need to be triggered after this decision is made. And once that process is triggered, it doesn't have to be a closed session, but it would be a session where Councillor Kitchus would want to declare a conflict. So we can't get into that piece of it right now. Councillor McWayne?
Thank you, Kerry. I don't know what's happening here. I guess I just want to repeat what I said earlier. I don't think that the person applying for judicial review or whatever you call it with the integrity commissioner should be compensated. And as I said earlier, I don't see how that person would ever be needing a lawyer to make a complaint to the integrity commissioner to begin with. But if that person decided to get a lawyer before the complaint going into the integrity commissioner, they should not be compensated for that. The person that has been charged with and found not guilty is the person who needed the lawyer to defend himself or herself, and that is the person who should be compensated, not the person who brought the charge. Other than that, I agree with either Neil or Ian said we need a bylaw. I agree with that 100%. I just don't like the way this bylaw is written at this particular point.
Councillor Kitchus?
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to thank you for addressing that issue of conflict, because I'm only deciding about this bylaw as it's written right now. I'm not deciding anything about compensation. I would like a clarification, because I had a little bit of a question before from the lawyer, Kevin Thompson. The joint, I think it's the ability to challenge the integrity commissioner's report, is that compensated by this bylaw? I just want to get a clear question. You said that it wasn't, but I just wanted that clarification, yes or no?
No, just to clarify through you, Mr. Mayor, I indicated that it is covered up to a certain monetary threshold. So as it stands now, there's a $10,000 monetary threshold for legal costs incurred in a judicial review of an IC investigative report. And so that's the mechanism by which a counselor might challenge an IC report, is to seek judicial review of the findings in the report and potentially the decision of counsel, for example, to suspend pay for 90 days, which is the maximum penalty that the council can impose. So legal costs incurred by a member in appealing or seeking judicial review of that decision are compensable up to a $10,000 threshold. Whether they incur costs or are awarded any costs through the judicial process, that's in the discretion of the judge. It doesn't mean they won't have out-of-pocket costs. We're talking about their out-of-pocket costs here that would be reimbursed, separate and apart from a cost award from a judge. So I apologize if I misled you in the first response to your question.
Follow on, Councillor Kitchus?
Having gotten clarification about that, I understand that this indemnity bylaw may be necessary, but the way it's written so that we will be needing lawyers more, and it will be incurring costs to the taxpayer. As we've already seen, we will see later in the full outlay of invoices, they were considerable amounts of money. And now this bylaw will add to that cost. So I can't support this bylaw. I think that the whole purpose of the Integrity Commissioner was for citizens, ordinary taxpayers, to have a vehicle for challenging their elected representative, the integrity, if they violated something. It wasn't meant for counselors or staff attacking other counselors and then the community seeing this whole affair out like dirty laundry. I'd like to add that it was other counselors attacking me using public funds because they didn't have to pay for them. And this is the action. This is actually what happened. And it's not, the action I was vindicated on by the investigation, and it was a thorough finding. And so the preliminary discussion to this bylaw is, it's already been decided. And I find that this bylaw, as it is written, will incur more and more costs. It will actually incur more division. I have, shortly after the results of January 27th, I reached out to the mayor. I feel that this divisiveness is not because of allowing the free speech of your elected representatives. That's what should be the norm. And so the bylaws that we were thinking of, the staff relations policy, those would have restricted that free speech. And that's why I opposed them. And I went to the public and informed them about that. And the findings found that that was fine. And so I think that I'm concerned about passing this as it is written. And I think that it will just incur more and more costs, and it will be more and more divisive. The only way to move forward on this is to build the relationships through an apology and then go from there. And I have done that, and it hasn't happened. And that is how you move forward. You don't move it by having more rules and more legal costs. And unfortunately, this is what this bylaw will result in. And it's unfortunate because it only takes people just to sort of cross the table and do that action of building the bridges to reconcile the differences, and that's what it takes. And I've done that, and I'm waiting for the other side. And so I can't be for this as it is written, and so I'm probably against this. Thank you.
Hey, Councilor Dunsmore.
Yeah, I've got, we're going back into the old issues, the old arguments that were put before and settled by the Integrity Commissioner, and there's different interpretations of the results of that. So I'm not going to speak to any of that. I'm just ready to vote on this. So you call the vote. I'm ready to go.
Councilor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I'm also not going to get into the weeds on this. I'm just going to focus on the bylaw itself. Just commenting on what Councillor McElwain had said about reimbursing a complainant. Reading the wording, I think that they've appropriately covered how we will address reimbursing a complainant. Obviously, if the complainant is making anything that is concerned frivolous or vexatious complaints, that will not be covered. However, if there was a citizen who had a legitimate concern that needed to bring it forward and for whatever reason needed or rather incurred some costs, then it's only fair that we offer some compensation. So again, I see this bylaw as needed and suits the purpose.
Thanks, Councillor. So I will go around the room, and if you could state what your vote is. We don't need to hear all the rationale again. I'll read the recommendation, get a mover and a seconder, and then we'll go around and I'll ask you how you vote, and then the clerk will also do a formal vote as well. So the recommendation reads that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington authorize the mayor and clerk to execute a bylaw to provide indemnification for members of council and employees, including reimbursement to members of council for legal fees incurred when defending integrity commissioner investigations. I have a mover for that recommendation. Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCray. And then we'll go around the room. Councillor Foster, how do you vote on this?
I am opposed to this motion. I vote nay.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
I am in favor of this. Yes.
I'm voting against it.
Councillor Kittredge? Sorry, can you say that again, Councillor Kittredge? I read your lips, but nothing came across.
No.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Councillor McCray. Councillor McCray?
Yes.
Our clerk is going to go through and do an official tally. Carrie?
Yes, through you, a recorded vote was requested, so I will just call on Councillor Van Leeuwen.
Yes.
Councillor Foster,
No.
Councillor McElwain,
No.
Councillor McCray,
Yes.
Councillor Kittredge,
No.
Councillor Dunsmore,
Yes.
and Mayor Linton.
No.
Motion is defeated.
The motion was defeated. Okay, so moving on to 7.2. The amendment to the Committee of Adjustment bylaw to allow for electronic meetings. And you have a report in your package. Does either the clerk or the deputy clerk want to speak to that?
Through you, Mayor Linton, I think it's fairly self-explanatory. We are doing the same that we did with council, trying to hold Committee of Adjustment meetings electronically. In order to do so, we must pass a bylaw allowing us to hold electronic meetings. So that's in fact what this amendment does for us.
Okay, thank you very much. Clerk, any questions from council? Councilor McElwain?
Thank you. Just curious, Carrie, will we need to have a similar bylaw for all different advisory committees, et cetera, or is it just the Committee of Adjustment? Because I assume at some point we're going to have electronic meetings for all of our committees, and just wondering if we should be doing it all at once.
Through you, Mayor Linton, the advisory committees were covered under our initial bylaw. Because the Committee of Adjustment is a quasi-judicial committee and under separate rules and procedures under the Planning Act, they have separate rules and procedures that need to be amended. But advisory committees were contained in our procedural bylaw amendments.
Anything else from council? Okay, I read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington authorize the mayor and municipal clerk to execute a bylaw to repeal and replace bylaw 2019-009, a bylaw to provide rules governing the proceedings of the pay adjustment for the Township of Center Wellington, to allow for electronic participation in meetings and for members participating electronically to count towards quorum. Mover for that recommendation? Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCray. Any opposed? Are you opposed, Councillor McLean?
I'm not. Thought you were asking for yays versus nays.
Sorry, I pulled a fast one. Sorry about that. I'll be doing the opposed thing first, and that carries. Moving on to 7.3, bylaws to set 2020 tax rate and to amend the tax pre-authorized payment plans. And we have a report from our Managing Director of Corporate Services and Treasurer, Dan Wilson. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Mayor Linton. This report covers two separate bylaws. The first is to set the 2020 tax rates. The second is to amend our pre-authorized payment plans for tax payments. For the first bylaw, this is a bylaw that we bring forward to council every year. Basically, to pass the tax rates bylaw, we need a township approved budget, which happened December of 2019. And we need the County of Wellington to set tax policy, which they did in April of this year. The bylaw itself is in attachment A to my report. We did change the tax due dates from what we typically use on an annual basis. Residential due dates are typically at the end of June and the end of September, but we have extended those due dates to be the end of August and the end of October, just to give property owners a little bit more time to make tax payments at the end of the year. It does allow a fairly significant 4-month gap from the second quarter due date to the third quarter due date to assist residents with cash flow. With the second bylaw, the pre-authorized payment plan amendment, it's pretty similar to the pre-authorized payment plan bylaw that we have in place right now, which is 2008-073. The only change we're making is to change the 10-month pre-authorized payment plan to an 11-month pre-authorized plan. An 11-month plan is more consistent across the province. It provides property owners with that extra month to spread out their tax payments throughout the year. And it just seems to be the right course of action to take, again, to assist property owners with cash flow going forward. So with that, both bylaws are provided as attached, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Dan. Questions from council? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. A couple of questions, Dan. First of all, I note that the variance analysis that you table in attachment A, I realize it's for in respect of COVID-19, but it does roll up to the tax rates in the budget. I note that it only goes to September 1st. I'm surprised that it doesn't go further than September 1st. That's still fairly short-term thinking. It's only about 3 months away in a few weeks. It shows a shortfall of up to $1.1 million potentially as at September 1st. How come we didn't look further ahead for the entire operating year at the very least? In terms of down lost revenue and the management of expenses in particular.
Turn it over to Dan. Can you answer that question? Just verify the number that was just presented. $1 million.
I think Councillor Foster is referring to a report that we're going to be talking about later in the agenda.
Okay. Is there any part of that question that can be answered as part of this agenda item?
Well, this agenda item is dealing with tax rates, so we're just trying to see how I can relate it back. So we're setting tax rates in accordance with the 2020 budget as approved by council. The attachment that Councillor Foster is talking about is attachment A to report CAO 2019-05, which I believe is agenda item 8.1 on the agenda, is referring to variances to July 3rd in comparison to September 1st for the year. We are doing July 1st as we reported in the May 4th council meeting, just simply because through the emergency declaration, we've all been working to an initial date of July 3rd. In terms of September 1st, we had an indication from council on May 4th that a sensitivity analysis going beyond July 3rd would be useful. So we discussed that at a staff level and decided to go to September 1st as the next foreseeable date to do a sensitivity analysis on the analysis. So we didn't see a need, at least at this time, to present numbers to the end of the year, but we can certainly do that if it becomes something that we need to do from an emergency management perspective.
Okay, but the numbers then we'll be able to get to during that information item. Any questions about those numbers? Okay, thanks. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Sorry, I was moving around from bylaw to bylaw as we talking about ones further down and reports. No, I have nothing on this one. Thank you.
Councillor McAvoy?
Nothing really, except I do wish we had an opportunity to meet and discuss the budget in committee of the whole, like I had requested last month. Given the delay in the taxation and the letters going out for people's 2020 second half taxes, we could have delayed it a bit and had that committee of the whole meeting. I would have loved to have had a brief discussion on the actual 2020 tax rate. I was based upon a set of criteria in 2019 December, not in nothing is the same as it was back in December 2019. There are some communities in Canada who have canceled their 2020 tax hike to help their residents. And I feel we should have had that discussion as well before we had this set the tax rates for the second half of the year.
Councillor Kitfish?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess I have to agree with Councillor McElwain because I had seconded that motion last time. I think that we should have had a discussion about the 2020 budget. The situation is clearly different than when we had made the decision to pass that. This week, we received a letter forwarded by the clerk about, the information to decide, and it's exactly it. That citizen was correct. We should get all the information, and we should be able to make those decisions, but we don't get the information. Staff decides that this is enough discussion, and then last month, we didn't even get all those details. And that was one of the concerns I had at the last meeting concerning this budget increase. I think we should have discussed it. We should see the details of the expenses and everything. It was told to me that long time ago, councils got expenses monthly. They would see what they were costing. The integrity commissioner says there's municipalities that still do it, but we have not done that. We have this high level analysis, which Councillor Foster has said that it's not long term enough. And so I have some problems with for the taxpayer, having to pay now more again, when we haven't revisited the budget, and that's what we should have done.
Okay, I just remind councillors to stick with the item on the agenda. Here, we're talking about giving people a break as to when they pay their taxes. We've already made a decision as a council on what to do relative to the budget, so we don't have to go back and rehash that. That's been done already. So let's stick to what's on the agenda here and talk about giving people a break on when they have to pay their taxes. Councillor Dunsmore.
You echoed my feelings, Kelly. I just wanted to say that this bylaw extends the grace period, allows people to manage their finances in an uncertain situation, and we'll get to the budget when we have our budget meeting. So I'm good with it.
Councillor McCray?
I'm fine with what's presented.
Okay, I'll read the recommendation. That bylaws to set the 2020 tax rates and to amend the the Council of the Township of Center Wellington adopt bylaw to set the township tax rate for 2020, and that Council of the Township of Center Wellington adopt a bylaw to establish a tax pre-authorized payment plan over 11 months. I have a mover for that recommendation. Councillor McCray, seconded by Councillor McWayne. Any additional discussion on that? Any opposed?
Kelly, I'd like to voice my opposition to this. I am okay with spreading the payments out 11 payments instead of 10 months. I'm definitely okay with 60 days of changing the dates. But I am not okay with asking our citizens to pay for services they're not going to get. And I'm not okay with taxing for services that we have no ability to provide. And Your Worship, I am speaking to the item on the agenda, which is setting the mill rate. And I am not okay with mill rates that are materially overstated. We can't spend this tax money because we're not going to collect it. We're going to have an impact on user fees, and we're going to have an impact on lost taxation. We are effectively sticking our heads in the sand and ignoring the impact of COVID-19 by continuing to tax and spend as though there is no pandemic. So therefore, I am voting very much against this.
Any others opposed?
I am opposed for the reasons I stated.
Okay, and that is carried. Moving on to a rezoning application at 8480 Wellington Road 19 in Bellwood, Highland Pines. Yeah. And we have a report from our senior planner, Mariana. Welcome, Mariana.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Linton, members of council. Through you, Mayor Linton, the report before you is for a rezoning application at the property known as 8480 Wellington Road 19 in Bellwood. And it's for the purposes of expanding the existing Highland Pines seasonal campground. The 6-hectare or 15-acre parcel is a triangular shaped piece of land that's bounded by the existing Phase 3 campground to the north, Wellington County Road 19, and the Pine Meadows Retirement Community to the south, and the township's former West Garifraxa Municipal Office to the west. The land is currently zoned agricultural and is designated prime agricultural in the county's official plan. The zoning amendment requests to extend the existing adjacent site-specific campground zoning to the subject lands that are being added. The related official plan amendment number 111 was adopted by County Council on March 26, 2020 to redesignate the lands from prime agricultural to recreational to allow the campground use. The entire campground received similar planning approvals many years ago for a total of 650 campsites in 3 phases. Phases 1 and 2 are fully built out on adjacent lands and have been in operation for some time. And Phase 3 is currently partially built out. It's should be noted that the lands that are proposed to be added in this application will not result in any net increase to the overall number of approved sites. Rather, the existing sites that are planned for phase 3 are going to be reallocated over a larger area, with approximately 57 being on the subject added lands. So this will allow the sites in phase 3 to be approximately 24% larger, and that's the main purpose of the addition of lands. So as such, there will be no increase in servicing requirements. The redesignation and rezoning of the lands meets all the applicable provincial and county policies. The use is considered compatible with the surrounding agricultural uses and the surrounding campgrounds and residential uses. The land is considered to have poor potential for agriculture and is not viable for aggregate extraction, given the proximity to existing residential. And in addition, there's a demand for seasonal recreational uses in the township and county. So any site-specific matters with respect to servicing, drainage, traffic, and site design and circulation, and other matters are going to be addressed through site plan approval, which is expected to be submitted shortly if this is approved. A statutory public meeting was held on November 25th to obtain input, and no oral submissions were received during that meeting. The county has, as I said, adopted the related official plan amendment and has no objection to the rezoning application. Other public agencies have provided comments with no objections. So based on staff's review of all the comments received to date and all the applicable policies, staff recommends approval of the application to amend the zoning bylaw to expand the existing Highland Pines campground. And I'd be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mariana. Any questions from members of council with this item? Councilor Kittrus?
Thank you, Mayor. Mariana, I was wondering if any of the residents or the Ratepayers Association there were notified directly about this rezoning.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Linton. The owner would have been required to post the notice. So wherever there was a public posting bulletin board, that's where the notice is posted for a site like this. It wouldn't have gone directly to the leaseholders or tenants on the properties. It would have been posted in a public notice.
Any other questions from council? Councilor Kittrus, follow on.
Is the owner of the Pine Nettles the same one as the campsite, though?
Sorry, no. Sorry, your question was on the actual site itself, or like all the adjacent lands, or is it the Pine Meadows? So Pine Meadows, they would have received notice as well. I don't know if it went out individually or if it went to the, if there was an association. That I could check for you, but I don't know who it went to directly.
Anything else from council? Okay, I'll read the recommendation that the Council of the Township of Center Wellington approve application RZ07/19 and that a bylaw to amend the zoning bylaw be given a tree reading. Have a mover for that, please. Councilor Dunsmore, seconded by Councilor McWayne. Any opposed? And that is carried. Thank you very much, Mariana. We have under section 8, we have a number of information items. Some of them will take longer to go through. Some of them will take longer to go through than others. But the first one, I'll hand over to our CAO, Andy.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Just wanted to highlight, go through our report with regards to updating council and community as to a number of things that have been happening since our May 4th meeting, as well as Dan, as Councillor Foster mentioned earlier, have gone through an additional analysis of our revenue and expenses up till September 1st. So we'll update you on that. So very quickly, so as people are aware, numbers from the Wellington, Dufferin, Guelph Public Health are decreasing in our area slowly. But in listening to Dr. Mercer in our weekly meetings, as the Mayor mentioned, as our part of our county meetings, Dr. Mercer does report. She's optimistic, however, she's very cautiously optimistic, as they're very concerned with regards to the reopening, supporting the reopening slowly but steady, but also making sure that people do abide by social distancing or physical distancing, washing their hands, and staying at home as much as possible. The Wellington Dufferin Guelph Health Unit website is the best for most accurate information on a daily basis. However, that being said, since this report was written earlier last week, we are seeing an increase in provincial numbers, rising back over the 400 for the last 4 or 5 days, and that is raising some concerns with regards to further looking at different reopenings. The province has extended the provincial emergency extension till June 2nd, so that still is under law by the provincial government, as well as they have expanded their declarations with regards to the emergencies, various frameworks within that until May 29th. On May 14th, the Premier did announce the beginning of phase 2, so the restart framework within the provincial framework. That is broken down into 3 stages. The announcement on the May 14th did make some uncertainty with regards to what was actually being open or allowed to be open effective that long weekend or the Tuesday. And so shortly after, on May 19th, the Chief Medical Officer of Health from the province did send out a new media release, as well as some clarification to municipalities and businesses as to very much clarifying what was allowed to be open and what was not. And so we did review that at our EOC, making sure that as we start to reopen, we're abiding by the rules set out by the province and the medical health team. So we do continue to meet 3 times a week with our EOC. We are just going to be reducing that down to 2 next week, and making decisions based on overall corporate initiatives, and making sure we're checking and making sure looking after our staff and protecting our staff, our residents, and our economic viability within our community. As the Mayor mentioned previously, we do continue to still meet once a week with the county through a teleconference, and that we do have regular updates from Dr. Mercer, the OPP, paramedics, and the county and the member municipalities from both the mayors and from the CAOs. And we do try to work consistently across the entire county, so we're treating all of our Wellington residents fairly and equally. The county member treasurers continue to meet, so Dan does meet weekly with the treasurers from all across the county in looking at other ways to save and help provide savings for our community and our residents and businesses. And that bylaw was one of those ways to extend the payment dates for taxes. And as well, Dan will be speaking to the expanded financial analysis up to September 1st. And into speaking to Councillor Foster's comment, the reason we have not gone any further, as we don't have current guidance with regards to what facilities may be opening in the fall. I know our Parks and Rec staff are meeting with the organizations to see what type of use they may be using in our buildings, including in arenas and ice pads. So at this stage, until we know a little further with the guidelines from the province with regards to how that operations will be looking and how much we'll be able to operate, we're unsure of that at this point in time. We continue our meetings with the province and the Community Foundation. Good news from the Community Foundation, they did receive a funding of $75,000 from the federal government with regards to one of their not-for-profit fundings. And so our foundation does have that funding. They'll be looking at ways to help provide grant funding to help support our not-for-profit and cultural organizations in our community. Again, we met with RTO4 and our Economic Development Task Force looking at ways to recover in our community, and funding options are always on the table, asking the province and the federal government for additional funding for our community as well as for our businesses. The mayor has continued his weekly radio spots on the radio and making sure that we're lobbying the upper levels of government. And I know the mayor has spoken to both Michael Chong and Ted Arnott with regards to supporting and making sure that our businesses are making access to those programs offered at both levels. From From a staffing and ongoing work, so over the past 3 weeks, we continue to operate our regular business operations and supporting our community. The staff outline that we presented May 4th is continuing along and making sure our businesses and service programs are offered. And quite a few comments from our community, our residents, and from our staff is it is busier now than it is during our regular, as we're trying to do our regular work as well as address the COVID situation. They're having some changes over the last few weeks from both the province and the feds. And the key one from the province is now that we're moving to the stage of reopening and restarting, only stage 1 in that phase. And as you listen to the Premier on a daily basis, he is ensuring that we're going to be taking this at a very slow, cautious approach to ensure that we can keep our public safe and keeping the spread of the virus down. So no additional township services have been canceled since our May 4th report. However, we are in the phase of starting to reopen, especially in our open space and parks areas. And so our community services staff have been diligently working away, ensuring that we meet our provincial framework as well as our recommendations from the health unit with regards to the guidelines and procedures to implement that. And I think it's going very well in working with folks like our tennis club and our trails associations to make sure that we're opening those as we can. And the recent announcement by the GRCA in opening up the trail section to Bellwood, as well as opening up some of their parks, sure is for day use, sure is helping allowing our public getting out into the nice weather outdoors. Brett and Randy and his staff are busy, continuing to be busy, as well as seeing more applications as the construction sector in phase 2 was opened up, even additional work to be doing. So we've seen
Zach, you're frozen.
I'm good?
No.
I'm good here.
He's actually not standing as still as he looks like he is. He's actually moving.
Oh, shoot.
His computer looks like it's frozen.
You better call for a recess. I've lost Zoom. I think we've got a Wi-Fi issue.
Yeah, it looks, although, oh yes, we have a network. It looks like we have a Wi-Fi issue, so give us a couple minutes to figure things out. It seems like the people that are on the network are frozen. I'm not on the network, that's why I'm not frozen. So give us a couple minutes, take a washroom break, and we'll be back when things are back on here.
test. Hey, Ian, can you hear me? Can you hear me? It's Pat.
I can hear you.
Oh, great. Last time after we took a break, my mic no longer works. I just want to check.
Very clear.
Thank you. I'll go back on mute.
I think we have quorum. We can finish this meeting, guys.
Carrie, can I test my mic? I just got a weird message on my screen that I was muted or something.
You're good.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have everybody back again? I think we fixed the thing because we've unfroze the people that were froze. And it looks like we're all good to go. So, where would you know where you were? Yeah. Okay. So turning it back over to our CEO.
Thanks. So I think I was reviewing what things are now allowed to be open. So just clarifying with regards to fields. So our outdoor sports fields, multi-use fields, baseball diamonds and soccer fields are now open. Tennis courts are now open. And in other municipalities, things like picnic tables, benches, our dog leash area is also reopened effective last week. So our staff are still working away trying to get some other facilities, including our skateboard parks, open for later this week. We're just trying to get some clarification with regards to procedures and guidelines from the health unit in the province with regards to those. It is very clear, though, that sports fields are not to be used for team activity. They're still to be used for individual activity and small groupings of less than 5 and from the same family. Just looking at, and it's very clear that we do still encourage, I think some of you probably saw the situations in Toronto and some of the states where people by the thousands were going into the parks and not physical distancing and not wearing masks. So it is, our health unit has strongly recommended that if you cannot keep your physical distancing of 2 meters, that masks are very much encouraged for all users. You're not protecting yourself, you're protecting others from getting it if you are symptomatic. In regards to downtown, so we have been working with our 2 BIAs to try to help their businesses. And so effective this weekend, we are looking at closures of our Metcalf Street and West Mill Street, opening up to allow pedestrian only. We're also just finishing up working on a possible closure of just a part of East Mill Street to just past Carger Gallery. In order, all of those streets from Saturday morning at 9 o'clock until Sunday night at 7 o'clock will be pedestrian only. The big concern there is our sidewalks in our downtown are not large enough for social distancing, and we want to give our businesses the full opportunity to have as much use of the sidewalks for lining up, for pickup and deliveries and things of that nature. So it was actually a proposal by the Laura BIA in response to ours that we presented to them about closing off the parking. And they wanted to go even further by closing down the 2 streets for the summer, for a number of the weekends in the summer until we see how things go. And so we'll be putting in barriers. Our roads department has been working with the county, and signage and letters were distributed to business owners and residents last week, letting them know that this would be coming. We had a very good meeting with the Elora BIA back on May 11th in the evening. So we chatted about a variety of things, and this was the proposal that everybody felt was the strongest to help support the majority of the business owners over the weekend, as we expect the weather will get nicer and the crowds will be coming back to Center Wellington. We're also just working on some of the further details with regards to barricades, but they will be put up by 9 o'clock. Business owners are allowed to have deliveries before Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, and then that'll be closed off till 7 o'clock. So everyone is aware to be able to do that. There will be signage about other parking locations, including across by the LCBO, on Getty Street, as well as over at the Elora Community Center. And then on Tuesday night, tomorrow night, staff will be meeting with the Fergus BIA to see how we can assist them in supporting their businesses by allowing as many people to physically distance themselves while they're shopping and exploring the downtown. So some good news with the BIAs and working together with them to help support them in their initiatives as they restart and trying to gain some economic recovery in the community. So further, without any more information, I will pass on for Dan to go through the financial implications.
Thanks, Andy. So we continue to monitor the financial impacts of COVID-19 on the township. As was discussed earlier, we did do an update of the financial impact at a high level to September 1st, and that is included in Appendix A to the report. You'll see that the initial analysis going to July 3rd, which we talked about on May 4th, showed a net impact between $0 and $300,000. The new impact going to September 1st is between $75,000 and $405,000. You'll see there isn't too much of an increase there going from July 3rd to September. That is predominantly due to 2 items. The first is that many of the items included in the July 3rd analysis were full impact for the entire year, such as investment income, and you'll see investment income did not change going to the extended analysis to September 1st. And also a lot of our summer programs and services in Parks and Recreation, which is our major impact area, are significantly offset by cost savings in areas such as staffing. So moving forward from July 3rd to September 1st doesn't result in dramatic increases in impacts to the township on a net basis. Council did decide on May 4th to allocate the 2019 operating budget surplus to a COVID-19 reserve, totaling just over $783,000. And that appears to be sufficient based on the new numbers to September 1st, based on numbers we have to date. And future reports to council will look for recommendations on how to use the $783,000 to support any shortfalls that we have within the 2020 year. We currently continue to waive NSF and return fund fees as passed by council earlier in the year. We continue to provide refunds for recreation and culture programming that have been canceled at the request of the resident. And we are hearing some rumblings from other levels of government that we'll be seeing some infrastructure grant programs come out in the near future, which is good news. From a taxation perspective, the April 30th tax due date went really well. Very comparable to other years in terms of taxation amounts collected. So we didn't see too much of an impact on COVID-19 on that due date. We will see if the extended due dates that we provided in a previous report this afternoon will have any impact on collections later in the year. So as council is aware, we had the tax rate bylaw passed earlier this afternoon, which also provided an 11-month pre-authorized payment plan, which provides additional financial breaks to property owners, which is great. We continue to track cash flow township-wide. As mentioned on May 4th, senior staff have been discussing the capital program and delays in the capital program that could help from a cash flow perspective. And we are looking at the three buckets: capital that is proceeding as normal, capital that is delayed until we see what the impact of cash flow is within this year, and then capital that is on hold to 2021. That analysis that we had completed is attached in attachment B to the report, showing all of the 2020 approved budget capital projects in what category they've been allocated to, as well as any projects prior to 2020 that we've decided to delay or put on hold for the short term. So in total, approximately $4.88 million in capital projects have been either delayed or put on hold, which can assist significantly with cash flow if needed for the next number of months. We have had discussions with the county as well on tax installments due to the county, and the county did pass a bylaw that allows lower tiers such as Center Wellington to submit rather than submitting full quarterly installments to the county, that we would submit based on the proportion of taxes collected. So if we do get into a situation in Q3, for example, and we're collecting taxes and we don't collect the entire amount, we can reduce proportionately the amount that we pay to the county for Q3. So that again will help us from a cash flow perspective, and that's been formally adopted by the county. From a pre-budget perspective, we do have a meeting set up to talk about the 2021 budget on June 15th, and that meeting will include a proposed budget timeline for the 2021 budget and a bunch of other things on the agenda. So we're looking forward to that as well. But that concludes my components of the report.
So thanks very much, Andy and Dan. It's really good for us as members of council to recognize that we have qualified professional staff with a real good handle on expenses and revenues, even during this time of COVID. So appreciate that, and recognition that we'll be starting to discuss the 2021 budget already next month. So that's good. So this is just an information report, so there's no direction of council required. But I am going to go around the room and ask if there's any comments from members of council. We'll start with Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. I do have three questions, Mayor, for Andy and or for Dan, if I may. The first question is, I know we just passed the 2020 mill rates for the budget, and I know that Appendix A is dealing with revenue loss and impacts only to September the 1st. And Dan and Andy, we could say that hockey is money because there's huge revenue coming to the town from hourly ice time. And hockey season's only 3 months away. Really, effectively, the tryouts will start in July and August, and full-on hockey in September. That's only 3 months away, and it would be reasonable, I think, to conclude that there's a very good chance that hockey season is going to be canceled next fall. And that's part of the 2020 operating year. And if that should happen, there's going to be a huge revenue loss. Now, I've calculated out as much as $2 million in lost revenue from ice time. My question is, why haven't we looked beyond September 1st, at least for the full operating year, when we're planning the budget for a full operating year? We really should have been planning for the worst case scenario and hoping for the best, but we haven't even looked at the potential loss of hockey season, which will have it's going to change Appendix A by a large number. Why haven't we looked further to at least the full operating year? That's my first question.
Okay, let's answer it in time. We're moving from across the hockey apparently. So moving over to our CEO, he's going to respond to that.
Thank you, Mayor Linton, through you to Councillor Foster. So as I mentioned earlier, Councillor Foster, at this stage, the sports organizations are unsure as to whether they're going to be canceling their season or not. So we are having discussions with them. A number of the organizations are looking at that. If they do not have the ability to do full leagues, then they will be looking at skill training. And so we're working with them to see whether that means it impacts one pad of ice or two pads of ice. So we are currently working that with our staff. So a number of the organizations are rethinking how they will be actually offering their programs. Second to that, as you notice in this chart, when we look at the fall, not only will, if there are cancellations, we will have less revenue, but we'll also have less expenditures with regards to that because there are a substantial amount of part-time seasonal staff that are hired to support those programs and operations, as well as increased energy costs and operational costs to do that. So as we show in this chart, going up to September, we've done that both expenditure reduction as well as revenue expense reduction. So those are things that we're currently working on. We don't have the answers yet as to whether the province will be allowing to open. If you look at the framework by the province, they are looking at stage 2 and stage 3, and we anticipate some in stage 2 and some in stage 3 of the facilities being opening, and therefore returning to some sort of regular operation. And so at this time, we are not anticipating to have a full closure of all the facilities going through to the fall. We're currently working on those with the organizations, and as soon as we have those answers, we will be reporting back to council on a frequent basis. Our intent is to be looking at this, as Dan said, on a weekly and daily basis, but also reporting to council on a monthly basis to where we stand with those. The numbers that Dan has shown in attachment A, we are in a reasonable amount of cost of only $75,000 to $405,000 is lost impact to ours. And then that is not a substantial amount in the overall tax incremental. And so we will be reporting back, and I do trust our accountants who have a very good handle in working our department heads and our staff, ensuring that we know what the numbers are and reporting those as soon as we have those and following what the ministry and provincial guidelines are.
Did you have a follow-on question, Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Andy, for your response. It would appear that we've just passed a bylaw to tax for a full year, but we're only considering lost revenue for a partial year, and that concerns me. My second question, Dan, is on your Appendix A, there's nowhere do I see any consideration of the loss of slots revenue. Now, the OLG facility, I believe, is not open, or at the very least, there's going to be a huge impact in operations, and therefore there'll be some lost slots revenue. Could we explain why we haven't considered the lost slots revenue in attachment A?
Through Mayor Linton, slots revenue from an accounting perspective comes in as revenue and comes out as a transfer to our OLG reserves. So from an operating perspective, there is no impact as a result of money received or not received from OLG. And through our OLG policy, monies received in any given year are put into a reserve to fund the following year's capital program. So that is something we'll be talking about in 2021 budget discussions in terms of the available OLG funds received in 2020 that can fund the 2021 capital program. But just to be clear, there's no operating impact as a result of OLG funds.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Yeah, I'm thankful for this this report and update. We're able to look at and stage ourselves through, I would say, quarters or months to month. One of the major things I even from my own staff has said, take 1 month at a time. Every week it seems to be changing. Every month it changes. We need to kind of walk this slowly and see where things go. I'm appreciative that we're out to September 1st. And also, if I'm requested about projects and capital projects, I can also see very clearly what's pending, what's on hold, and what's proceeding. So thank you for that information items, and I have nothing further. Thanks.
Councillor McElwain?
Thanks, Kelly. I guess my comment is kind of the same as it was earlier. I do wish that council had been involved in the revision to the capital budget. I look at it and it's very possible that we would have come up with exactly the same set of which projects go forward and which ones are delayed, etc. But not ever having been involved or questioned or in any way involved from a council perspective, I don't know what we would have agreed with. The one thing I do wish that, or I do wonder is, has staff, while they are doing all of the capital budget reallocation, reallocated anything yet to preparing shovel-ready projects for potential investment or infrastructure investment from the feds or their province?
Andy's going to speak to that.
Yes, through you, Maryland, Councillor McElwain. We are currently reviewing those, not only from a 2020 as well as 2021 capital project list. We're hearing rumors of the type of criteria that they're looking at. Our understanding at this stage is they're very much looking at our asset, looking to fund projects identified in our asset management plan. And so that will be a key criteria. What we don't know is the size of projects at this point in time. We are anticipating that the feds and at least the feds, we understand, may be looking at an announcement in the early part of June. But we're looking at different options from small projects to grouping projects to larger projects and having those ready for shovel ready to make applications to both levels of government when they do announce those.
Councillor Dunsmore?
Yeah, Kelly, thank you. And Dan, it was 4.88 million that's been put on hold or deferred, delayed. Is that correct?
That is correct. The sum of capital projects that are either on hold or delayed total roughly $4.88 million.
Just to follow up, Kelly, then, so we can safely assume that a lot of those projects would be shovel ready because we have them to go. So if we do get funding from the federal and provincial government, we're ready to go and we can put those back on the agenda, correct?
Yes, that is correct. And the funding that was set aside for these capital projects still remains with the capital projects unless provincial funding becomes available. But yes, they are considered ready to go.
Councillor Kistras?
Thank you, Mayor. I made my comments about the tax part earlier, but I have some other questions for Andy, just about, because he's privileged to more information than maybe we are. I'm wondering about religious services in Center Wellington, is there any like county or municipal rules concerning that, or is it all just by the province? And what, I have 3 churches in my area, and so that's one question. The other one is the offices going to be opened on July 3rd? Is that when the reopening is? And if there's any protocols for marriages by Center Wellington?
Sorry, it appears that we've lost Councillor Foster. And our procedural rules say that once we lose a councillor, we have to call a recess and try to get them back on the line. So I'm calling a recess until we can locate Councillor Foster. If anybody sees him wandering around the street, let me know. Okay, I think we're all back now. Councillor Foster, you can hear me?
Yes. Yes, Kelly. Sorry about that. There was a disconnect.
Okay, no problem. Okay, your questions have been put out there, so I think I'd turn it over to Andy to respond, and he can get staff to help him out if he needs that.
Right. Thank you, Mayor Linton. Through you to Councillor Kittredge. With regards to churches, that is regulated by the province. It is not a local municipality declaration or anything, so it is specifically to the province and their declarations. Connecting with the province would be the best way to do that. I do know that they have started looking at some releasing of gatherings with regards to religious and setting up some guidelines, but there are, if the province is releasing, then there will also be some guidelines coming out of the province as how to do that. So my best suggestion would be going to the provincial phone line or checking their website out to see if there's guidelines for churches. We have no control over those. Second questions with regards to our office is opening on July 3rd. Again, we're waiting and seeing what the next stages of release are by the province. Majority of the communities that we've been talking to, including all through the county, we're all starting to put in place, including separation barriers and personal protective equipment. However, as you're hearing from some other municipalities and other locations, some may not open their doors to all their services that they provide right away. There may be a phasing in of those services throughout the for our building. So we're hoping to find that out a little bit further in June as to when we may be looking at opening at least these portions of the administration building to the public for certain services. But we are knowing that we're meeting most of those services electronically. Marriages, so we're one of the few municipalities that are still offering providing marriage licenses. We just aren't doing marriages themselves because of the close contact. But I know many municipalities have actually canceled even issuing of marriage licenses. So we are one of the few that is still performing that duty. So I think those are the three questions.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor McCray.
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I just have a couple of questions. I guess the first one is, given our concern about water, I noticed that our well exploration program and repurposing F2 and F5 are temporarily delayed. Is there sort of an idea of when some of those might be proceeding in 2020? My second question is, we mentioned that certain streets will be closed in Elora in Saturday and Sunday. I just want to confirm the hours are 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Saturday and Sunday, and will there be any deliveries allowed during those periods, or yes or no? And then my final question is, as a new councillor, I just want you to, I guess, comment on my understanding, and that is, when council approves the 2020 budget, we pass responsibility for its management to staff. Therefore, from my perspective, staff are doing their due diligence of ensuring that at the end of 2020, we will have a balanced budget, as is the requirement of the Municipal Act. So what I see is staff is doing what they should be doing, which is managing the budget, which means council should not be getting our noses involved at this point unless staff approach us asking us for a specific requirement. So those are my questions.
So I'm going to turn it over to our CAO to answer question 2 and respond to item 3, and then we'll pass it over to Colin to deal with question 1. Andy?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Through you to Councillor McCray. So just briefly on the capital list. So that is just us taking a look as to our resources currently. Our hope is that we're still going to be continuing with the majority of those projects. They may just be delayed a month or two, and so it's a bit of resourcing, but I'll let Colin just speak to that more from a timing piece. For those two projects you mentioned. In regards to the closure of the streets, we are looking from 9 a.m. Saturday morning right through till Sunday evening at 7 p.m. So they will be closed down on Saturday evening, but we have told the business owners that to arrange the deliveries, that they can bring in the deliveries first things in the morning, so Saturday morning and early Sunday morning, before the crowds and the businesses start open. So we're hoping all the deliveries can be arranged between 6 or 8 a.m. and 7 a.m. and 9 a.m. And then those barricades could be put back in place with the delivery service vehicles by 9 a.m. in the morning. So we are allowing for that flexibility with the businesses, and that was something we did talk to the BIAs. We know we're not going to have it perfect the first weekend. That's why we're hoping this weekend to get see how that works, and we'll be making changes as we require to, and working with the BIAs. But we're trying to be as flexible as we can, and going to be after this weekend sitting down with the Elora BIA and seeing if there's any tweaks or concerns that we need to look at in order to keep it operating for a number of weekends through the summer. So that'll be flexible as we go, and they're having the BIA be in contact with their business members as well. And we know not everybody's 100% in agreement, but they all felt it's worth trying and seeing if they can help support getting some of the economy going back in Elora. And as I mentioned, meeting with the Fergus BIA tomorrow night to see how we can support them. The third question, I'm trying to remember the question now.
About the role of council.
Oh, correct. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. So, correct. So after, when council does approve the budget, it is for staff to manage. And that is why we do bring quarterly reports on both the operating and capital budget to council to ensure that we're managing the budgets that were council approved. The province does not allow the municipalities to go in a deficit. And so that is something we're well aware of at staff, and we're doing everything we can. And that's why we are reporting these on a monthly basis to council to show the large picture and how we're managing that and ensuring that we're doing the wise use of our budgets. Even if you've taken it outside of the COVID years, you will see through our capital project list on a quarterly basis, we may be reporting one is delayed by a couple months because we're waiting on approval or we didn't get something from the ministry. So this is a normal operations that we do on a regular yearly basis. It's just this year extra large with the COVID situation.
Thanks, Andy. For question one, water project, turning it over to Colin.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Linton, and through Mayor Linton. So yeah, we've basically identified those water supply master plan projects as delayed. We're really looking at implementation of those this fall. So if it was a project that was still planning to proceed to implementation, maybe it's later in the year, it would have been flagged as delayed. So that's the plan. We still have a construction tender for the new wells to be put together. So there's going to be some work pulling together that document. There's a procurement process as well that we're going to spend some time over the next couple months pulling together contract documents. And then also we're juggling priorities too, right? And resources. It's important to get the road and bridge projects out early because we know contractors' plates do fill up quite quickly early in the construction season. So I think our last road reconstruction to close will be likely the Elora Street project in Fergus. That's slated to close on June 2nd. So it's a bit of a resourcing, a bit of the way we kind of planned out our work program for this year, but the implementation for later on in the fall, early winter.
Thank you.
Thanks, councillors, for that. Again, no action required there. So thanks for the good information. A lot is going on behind the scenes, so appreciate our staff keeping things going. Moving on to 8.3, Treasurer's Annual Statement, 2019 Investments. Anything you want to add to that, Dan?
No, nothing to add. Thanks.
Okay, sorry, I skipped one. 8.2, Center Wellington Sportsplex Tennis Courts. And I know this is something that's been in the works for a while, so I'm going to turn it over to Pat to speak.
Thank you. So I guess we're just trying to get back to council based on the recommendation and motion that was made back in April of 2019 to bring back a plan for the Sportsplex courts in working with the tennis club. That was intended to come in April and to CSAC as well as to the committee of the whole meeting, and with the COVID emergency, that was not possible to do. And now we're permitted to open the tennis courts. So staff worked very closely with the tennis club, and we're cooperatively opening both sets of courts, what we feel is public times that are now free. The tennis club has reduced their rates significantly, and in speaking to them, they have more members than they ever have. And because the courts cannot be used in the same manner that we would normally use them, it's for singles play only, there's restrictions on what you can do on the courts. The tennis club is not offering their regular programming. They are simply booking courts with an online court system for singles play or doubles play if you're from the same family. And it seems to be going quite well since we opened everything on Wednesday. So I'm happy to answer questions. But mostly what I wanted to let council know is that in the fall, once we've got more information and we can meet in person and have an opportunity for CSAC to review the recommendations of the tennis agreement and make recommendations to council, we'll bring it back then for a fulsome discussion on everything in that agreement.
Thanks, Pat. Any questions from council on this item for information? Okay, moving on to the next item, 8.3, the Treasurer's Annual Statement on our investments, and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mayor Linton. Not too much to add on this report. Just in summary, we're required to provide this summary annually. It's part of our investment policy at the township. And I just want to state that we are having discussions across the county, including the county and all the lower tiers, to potentially move forward with a joint investment strategy, which is in line with the KPMG service delivery review. But given other priorities, that's been put on hold at the moment, but it's something we will hopefully get to in the near future.
Yeah, that's good news. I'm really pleased that the treasurers across the county and the county are working together on some of this stuff. It's really good. Any questions from members of council with this report? Councilor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. Dan, a question regarding our investments with the credit unions. I guess I'm just wondering, Dan, there's a CDIC deposit insurance with chartered banks. I'm just wondering if deposits are insured with credit unions and Caisse Populaire in the same manner as with CDIC. Just wondering if you can speak to that. The deposits are insured with credit unions and Caisses Populaire.
Yeah, through Mayor Linton, it is a little bit different. It's not secured in the same manner as a normal bank, but I think that was part of the discussion way back when credit unions were added to our investment policy as eligible institutions for us to deal with. It's something we've never had a problem with in the past, and we've been very, very happy with credit unions' approach.
Great. 8.4, Treasurer's Annual Statement, the 2019 Interest-Free Loans Report. Dan?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Linton. Another annual report that's required. The schedule attached to this report shows the summary balances and activity for 2019 for our interest-free loans. We've included the Community Improvement Plan facade improvement loans on that schedule as well, which are added to property owners' taxes over 5 years interest-free. And I'd like to note that as of the end of 2019, all interest-free loans were in full compliance.
Good news. That's good news. Anything else from council? Okay, moving on to the Tender Award Committee report from January to March 2020. And turning over to Dan again.
Thanks, Mayor Linton. Only one Tender Award Committee report for the first quarter of 2020, and that was the award of the BD line and Millage line intersection improvements. As you can see from the report, we were well within budget and well under $1 million, which are the requirements for the tender award committee to make the award. Also on this report, this isn't something we normally do, but I know there's been some discussion on the Bellside Cemetery. So we've added this to the report to provide information to council. There were discussions amongst senior staff about the current situation with COVID-19 and the need to provide additional plots at the Bellside Cemetery. We decided to use the emergency provisions of our procurement bylaw, which allows us to move forward on emergency procurement without following the normal tendering or procurement process. But this requires a report back to council at the end of the project. So we are moving forward, as was discussed previously, with providing additional plots within Bellside Cemetery Block D, and work is underway. And a PO has been issued to company Neve Excavating to do the work. And once the work is completed, we'll be following the procurement bylaw and reporting back to council.
Thank you, Dan. Any questions from members of council? Councillor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. I have raised this matter. My question, I guess, is for Dan and perhaps for Andy. When we acquired the cemetery lands, the old town of Fergus in the 70s, that cemetery in Block D was already surveyed into graves and lots. I fail to understand what we achieved by declenching this work. I know it's only about $32,000 or $33,000, but you're basically putting in those step footers. We already had graves. They were already approved. They were already surveyed. We could have used those graves, and we've now spent the money on step footers. 90% of the cemetery doesn't have step footers. The footers are individual. Why didn't this come to council on April, the day before this decision was made? It could have easily done so.
Yeah,
And,
do you want us to respond to that? I'm going to respond to that initially because this question has been answered on numerous occasions. The cemetery master plan has been passed by the former council. Anything that was done beforehand, any sketches, any demarcations of cemetery plots, any of that stuff was now preempted by a new cemetery master plan that has been passed by council. So whatever was developed by other councils in the town of Fergus or whatever is immaterial at this point right now. All the project funds have gone through the appropriate process, council and staff-wise, and this project is proceeding as required. There's nothing surprising here. So any discussion, I don't need to turn it over to staff to answer any kind of questions about why council made a decision that they made in the previous term of council, because that's not the privy of staff to make those calls. We just know that the decision was made. So there's nothing really to discuss along those lines. If there's any questions about the status of the report that was provided or the project that we're talking about right now, we'll entertain those discussions. But I don't want to get into the whole thing about why council made a decision back in the last term of council. That's over.
Mayor, I think it's very material. We're going to spend $1 million and lose $1 million. And spend $100,000, but
there's nothing for council to discuss right now. Council made the decision the last term of council. Talking about that right now is outside of the scope of this agenda and outside of anything that we can do about it. So I don't hear any question that is appropriate for our staff to be answering at this point. Anything else from members of council? Councillor Kitchen?
Thank you, Mayor. On this report, it says that for the Bellside Cemetery, that there was a possible emergency situation with the COVID, and I'm just wondering how many deaths were recorded in Center Wellington on COVID.
Well, I don't think that's information that we can divulge. And I can let Andy speak to it. I don't think there's a whole lot that can be answered on this one. I'll turn it over to her.
As we reported before, we were down to 2 plots available still from the provincial as well as the cemetery or BOA or whatever it's called. We were very much being put on alert to prepare for a substantial amount of deaths throughout the province, and that municipalities not only needed to prepare for the possibility of deaths as part of the emergency planning, but also be available to provide the administrative components to that 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So we were very clearly being communicated from the province and those forecasting the numbers that we could be having substantial amount of deaths in our area and across the province. And so as good planning, we made sure that we were ensuring that we would be able to meet the needs of our community if that situation did occur.
Councilor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. Just a quick question about the BD line and Millage Lane intersection improvements. My understanding was we were going to be putting in sort of a pathway, sort of like a walk, wheel and roll type of asphalt pathway. So I'm just wondering, is that included in that scope of work? Because I see mention of a concrete sidewalk, but not the pathway.
Colin, is that your question?
Yeah. Thanks for your question through Mayor Linton. So it's actually, it will be an asphalt pathway. So what we've called the multi-use path, about 3 meters wide, and it's going to be on the west side of BD line. So we're going to do that across the development frontage on BD line, and then also to the south as far as the Nickel Drain crossing. And then a future project for BD line improvements will pick up that multi-use path, and kind of the plan is to take that further down to the south and link up with the Elora Cataract Trail. And so, and then the long-term plan is to put a concrete sidewalk on the east side at some point, but that's not included in this scope of this project at this point.
Thank you, Colin.
Councilor Kitchus?
The BB line Millage Lane intersection, I remember previously there was supposed to be a roundabout, but that's not at this intersection, is it? It's one lower than it, like the Colburn Street one. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, this is turning lanes and pedestrian signals to help with the pedestrian crossing at this location.
Okay, moving on to 8.6, capital project status. And turn it over to Dan.
Thanks, Mayor Linton. Not too much to add to this one. This is the status of our capital projects as of the end of 2019. Because it's the end of 2019, the 2020 approvals are not included in this analysis. You'll see those when we do the first quarter of 2020, which is hopefully next month. And you'll see within the report itself, we have a net impact of closing various capital projects at year end, where we're putting roughly 79,000 back into the general capital reserve. We're putting 185,000 back into the water capital reserve, and we require 103,000 from the wastewater capital reserve to close off various capital projects as shown in the report.
So now this seems like ancient history stuff. Any questions from council on the 2019 report, capital projects report? Councilor Foster?
Thank you, Mayor. 2 questions for Dan, perhaps 3. Dan, page 95, item number 52. I see that there's a budgeted figure of $1.1 million for the Salem Bridge and the James Street water main. What was the source of those funds? At $1.12 million.
Looking at Colin for confirmation, but I think that was through development charges.
Yeah, that's correct. That's development charge funded. The water main.
Yes.
The force main is sanitary sewer rates.
Councilor Foster, follow on.
Supplementary question. If that's funded with development charges, can you help me understand what development it applies to? What growth-related development is occurring in Salem that number applies to? Colin?
Yeah, Colin?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Linton. Through you, if referring to the water supply master plan, we look at potential future well sources. So a number of them are actually located west of Salem. And so this would be a future transmission main to connect to those sources. Also, in terms of the distribution system design for redundancy, we like to see a loop system, and there are longer-term plans to loop the water main down County Road 7, connecting to the existing system, kind of around David Street. So this project, with the county replacing the bridge, provided the opportunity. And actually reconstructing the road as well provided the opportunity to partner with the county, recognize those efficiencies, and have this project implemented in coordination with the county's bridge replacement project.
Yes, Colin, anything further, Councilor Foster?
Yeah, second question, item 47 on page 94, the pedestrian bridge. I note that in 2018, we budgeted just under $300,000, but the actual expenses came in at $2.7 million. Now, I do see the revenue line there. Can you help me understand who authorized the budget at 300, but the expenses at 2.7, and what's that revenue coming from?
Dan?
I'm a little perplexed at how we budget 300.
Dan?
Yes, through Mayor Linton, a lot of the costs going through for the pedestrian bridge were not through a budget process. They were through various staff reports. So you'll see the actual revenues coming in are based on council-approved staff reports, allocating the necessary funds to this capital project. A lot of the funds, two main funding sources there, the McDonald funding, Jack R. McDonald funding was the primary source of funding for the capital project. And then we've had some dedicated capital levy funding going in to support it as well. But all the revenue you see shown within that capital project was approved by council through various reports.
Anything else, Councilor Foster?
Yes, for clarity's sake then, Dan, how can you help me understand, how do we possibly budget $300,000 and incur $2.7 million in expenses? That doesn't square up with me. It's almost 10 times more expended than what we budgeted for.
I guess, I think I could even answer that, but correct me if I'm wrong, Dan. Every expense came through a council approval process, so that's how money was expended through the process. I'm not sure the numbers are correct, but that's the process that we used. Dan, you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's correct, Mayor Linton. We have capital projects that proceed and need council approval after a budget has been passed, and they can't wait for the next budget approval. So we do have various capital projects that need to move forward with unbudgeted funds, but endorsed by council, and this is one of those examples.
Okay, anything else from this committee, this report, Councilor Kitchis?
Thank you, Mayor. This is a question for Dan. Item 47 and 46. What is so the final cost of the bridge for 46 is 1.7753,516. Is that correct? And what is the total cost of the 47? Is that 2.690268?
Through Mayor Linton, so the total cost to the end of 2019 for West Mill, which includes road, water, and wastewater, was $1,775,516. And then the total cost of the Jack R. McDonald pedestrian bridge to the end of 2019 is $2,690,268.
So get this all.
So I think it's last meeting, we okayed for the piers. Is that on top of the 2.69268?
Through Mayor Linton, you'll see on the second line of item 47 where we have the piers and bridge lighting. At the time of the end of the calendar year 2019, the budget was $350,000. Through the 2020 budget, we added an additional $250,000 to that capital project. And then through the council report from a month ago, we added a little bit more funding to that capital project. So to date, as of the end of 2019, we've spent roughly $16,000 on that pier rehabilitation. But the total project costs for the pier are as per my report from a month ago on May 4th. So yes, those costs will be in addition to what's been spent to the end of 2019.
Okay, moving on to 8.7, Integrity Commissioner Summary of Invoices. This was what was asked for, and we had to wait till all the invoices came in. Mr. Journal, it took a little bit of time to get the invoices in, I've been told. So once the invoice is in, this information is here for council. Ask council if there's any questions on the report. It's pretty straightforward. The costs are right there. Anybody have any questions about the actual information presented? Councilor Dunsmore?
Yeah, my question is for Carrie. Perhaps she can clarify for me. The March 31st invoice, March 31st, 2020. There are 3 lines I want to ask if what they were related to. The first one is 01/26/2020 draft presentation to council code of conduct, new code of conduct for staff and staff relations policy, $780. Then there is a further preparation and presentation for the meeting to township council to attend the township meeting for $2,430. And then if you go further down, you get to mileage of $135.14. So am I right in assuming, Carrie, that that $3,345 worth of expenses were all related around bringing the integrity commissioner here to deliver this report to council?
Yes, that, through you, Mayor Litton, yes, that is my understanding.
Okay, so of that invoice that was 7,000 and change, that's about 47% then.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else from council on this one? Okay, moving on to the next item on our agenda. My computer froze, so I'm gonna have to have a paper copy for a sec. we just have left over the two county reports. The first one is the planning resolution, the 2020 provincial statement. Do you want to mention anything about that, Brett, or you wanted just to answer any questions?
I don't have a lot to add, Mayor Linton. This is just, we rely on the county having policy planners on staff to prepare comments on the provincial policy stuff, and both reports that are on the agenda relate to things that the county are doing at the policy level. So there's a provincial policy statement being updated for 2019 and takes effect on May the 1st, I believe. So county's just reporting on its comments on the policies that are included in the policy statement, but as I said, already took effect on May the 1st. Then the second report is related to their public education or public consultation strategy for their official plan review.
Anything from council on this information report? Councilor McElwain?
Thanks, Kelly. Brett, you occasionally, or maybe all the time, I'm not sure, also submit your own comments, though, do you not?
I have in the past. Mostly, we usually see the county comments sort of in draft form as a preview, or when they go to the committee before they go on to be adopted by council. And typically what we've done is not comment unless we think the county's comments sort of haven't gone far enough. So speaking of a specific example I could think of is back when the growth plan was going in 2017, and the update to the growth plan was possibly looking at our growth densities increasing and our intensification densities increasing quite significantly, possibly doubling, and seeing that the greatest impact of that would be on the township. We did submit our own comments on that one for sure. And I think with regard to that one, the mayor and the CAO made it part of their presentations to municipal affairs at conferences, because our concern there was outside. More recently, the provincial stuff since 2018 has come through so fast and furious, to be honest. Our staff, without any dedicated policy staff, we are in a difficult position of being able to keep up with the pace of all the changes. You know yourself about the Aggregate Resources Act and provincial policy now changing on this score. So we do struggle to keep up, and we're dependent upon the county staff reviewing. We do share any particular concerns that we have with them. The other thing that's happening, I think, here, like a very short turnaround between the comment periods and the document actually taking effect. So,
thanks, Brett. Anything else on this one? The next one is another county resolution regarding the official plan review, and it's in your package here. It's approved by county council already. Any questions from council on 8.9? Okay, moving on to the council tracking list. Any questions for the items that we have on the council tracking list? Okay, moving on to bylaws. I have a recommendation that bylaws 2020-21 through 2020-25 be read a first, second, and third time pass, signed by the mayor and clerk and the corporate seal. Next, I have a mover for that recommendation, Councillor Dunsmore, seconded by Councillor McCrae. Anyone opposed? And that is carried. Moving on to notice of motion. We have a notice of motion from Councillor Kittredge, and I will be turning it over to Councillor Kittredge to introduce his motion. Councillor Kittredge?
Thank you, Mayor. I submitted this notice of motion. At the Township of Center Wellington shall hold a well-advertised public meeting attended by members of council before the end of April 2020, at which the Integrity Commissioner will provide an educational information presentation to members of the public, followed by a question and answer session about the new code of conduct for members of council from the perspective of providing and explaining the types of behavior that would and would not reasonably be expected to warrant a complaint by members of the public. And that following the above noted public education information meeting, the Township of Center Wellington shall promptly post and maintain on the township website in its section entitled Integrity Commissioner, the full text of the Integrity Commissioner's education information presentation to members of the public, together with the record of any resulting questions and answers. That was the motion. We had the coronavirus and that was delayed. The history on this is that after January 27th, Integrity Commissioner's report and the findings of the investigation and the passage of the new Code of Conduct and the staff relations policy and questions and answers directed to the Integrity Commissioners. The citizen, Ms. Beverly Cairns, who was in attendance, asked the Integrity Commissioner about citizens' inquiries and questions. The Integrity Commissioner spoke to her and said that this was after the meeting, that there is an educational component to the Integrity Commissioner's job. Since Bill 168 is for the benefit of citizens, and it's about integrity from their representatives. I emailed the CAO, Mr. Goldie, about if he would initiate a public educational session for citizens in the near future. And I was wondering if he would do that. He consulted with the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Steve Van Leeuwen, and said they decided that it was not necessary because the public had access to the Integrity Commissioner's report and the meeting with the Integrity Commissioner on the website. I went back to Mrs. Bev Cairns, and she said that that does not help citizens because they have their own concerns and questions. And this is the mandate of the Integrity Commission, to educate the public because of Bill 168 and for helping citizens with the integrity of their representatives. The meeting was mainly discussing the report and also the questions and answers about the two bylaws to the Integrity Commissioner and asking him advice about those. So that was mainly what the meeting was about. I went back to Mrs. Byrne, and so she said that. And so then I filed this notice of motion. The reasons I think that this notice of motion is valid is because Bill 168 is really for the benefit of the citizens. And the Integrity Commissioner is to seek the integrity of their representatives. With the bill changes, representatives now have access for advice, but it is very limited. It's only to representatives, it's not to citizens. That was made very clear in the January 27th meeting, and representatives can't ask questions willy-nilly to create costs. So it seems reasonable that the taxpayers and the citizens should have an educational system just for their understanding, so that they don't file nuisance complaints and then it costs time just to deal with all that stuff. So I think that this is a valid proposal, because I think it will bring clarity to ordinary citizens. They get to have their educational component. The Integrity Commissioner claimed that is part of his mandate. I think it will reduce costs, and then we'll have less nuisance complaints. That's it.
Well, thank you, Councillor Citrus. Well, if everybody's clear on the motion, you've moved it, so ask for a seconder for this motion, and then if we get a seconder, then we'll have a discussion. So Councillor McElwain has seconded this motion. So discussion from Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to speak in favor of the motion. Having public engagement and public awareness of the role of the Integrity Commissioner is a good thing. And that is something that will benefit the community. So I would be in favor of having such a session, and I would support this motion.
Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you, Mayor. Well, the motion, the issue we just seen here is every time we bring the commissioner in, and just to prepare for it, costs thousands of dollars, and then to drive here costs thousands of dollars. I don't have a problem with information sessions, but there is quite a bit of information online, and if there's a digital source or a page that we can also attach onto our website to say, if this is this the information you need, this is how you would process and who you would contact. That I think I could get behind, but the process of informing the public via requesting the Integrity Commissioner to come on site, I don't think I could stand behind that many dollars being spent on something like that, since we've seen the cost seems to skyrocket. Thanks.
Councillor McElwain?
I agree with the motion for pretty much for the reasons that Steve spelled out. I also don't like spending money when it's not necessary, but I don't see this being the same kind of thing where it's part of the Integrity Commissioner's role. It's a prepared presentation, and so it's going to be a couple of hours of his time, and it's going to be $100 and some of driving expense like the last time. So for less than $500, we're providing something reasonable to the public about the role of the Integrity Commissioner. It could be made part of one of the one of your open house meetings, fireside chats or whatever they're called. And I mean, it's something that the public would find interesting, I think, and it'd be useful for now, for this term of council, but also for the future.
Thanks, Councillor McElwain. Councillor Kittredge, I think you'll probably support it. Councillor Dunsmore?
I think Councillor Kittredge wants to say something. Let him go first.
Sorry, it's his motion. He spoke already. Councillor Dunsmore?
Okay, well, I'm just going to go back to the figures that I asked about in the Integrity Commissioner's report, and that's almost 3,400, 3,345.14. There were a group of residents that asked to speak to him. They registered to be delegates at that meeting, and then the Friday before that meeting, they withdrew themselves as delegates. And so he was here to answer those questions. Those of you who met him, he was quite amicable to hanging around and giving people an education and speaking to them. But they withdrew themselves as delegates at that point. I think we've already given them the offer, given them the opportunity, and I don't think we need to spend any more money in this economic environment to do it again.
Councillor McCray?
Thank you, Mayor Linton. I voice similar concerns to what Councillor Dunsmore just expressed. Furthermore, if one reads the Code of Conduct, it outlines the expected behavior. So I think for most citizens, if they read that, they should have an understanding of how we are supposed to behave as councillors. Besides, there's also the fact that each situation is unique and therefore cannot be covered in a general discussion. And that's something that the Integrity Commissioner mentioned when he came down in January, that there was unique circumstances that resulted in unique application of his decision. So I don't see this as being something to support. The other thing I could suggest is maybe staff accumulate a series of questions and answers that they could add to an FAQ section on our site regarding Integrity Commissioner.
That would be a cheaper option, I would think. Just speaking from my perspective, I wouldn't be in favor of it. I'm kind of tired of spending money on the Integrity Commissioner, and I think as Councillor Dunsmore already spoke to, they had an opportunity to register as delegates. The Integrity Commissioner would have responded to any questions that came out of those delegations, and that was why we brought him in the first place, in addition to help answer some questions of council. So for me, the majority of people in our community want us to get on with the business of running this town, and I wouldn't support it. So go around the room, last comments, and then provide me with your vote on this one, please. Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. I find the logic questionable here. We just spent $16,500 on 5 complaints, 4 of which were discharged quickly, and 1 of which was discharged as well. And now we're unwilling to spend another perhaps $500 educating the public on the role of the Integrity Commissioner. The logic of cost is simply not valid. I think it's good to educate the public on the matter. I think the public needs to know the role of the Integrity Commissioner, and I'm voting yes that we have such a session for that reason. Educating the public and helping them understand the Integrity Commissioner's role is a good thing, and it's going to be something like $500.
Councillor Van Leeuwen, just so you know, he is coming from Ottawa, right? So I don't know where you're coming up with that money, but anyway. Councillor Van Leeuwen?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I still think that there is so much information out there on the internet, and if anyone was ever in doubt as to how or what the process is, we have the council meetings that we went through. We have the commissioner's report that speaks to aspects of it and how councillors, if you have the same platform, certain aspects he will not deal with, and other things he could deal with. There's a lot of information out there, and I just don't see the use of these funds in a digital electronic world with tons of info to spend money to bring somebody down to do this. Not on this particular item. Thanks.
Anything to add, Councillor McLean?
I am in favor of the motion.
Councillor Kitchen?
I think I'd like to address some of the comments made about this in terms of cost. The cost is not very much. It's part of the Integrity Commissioner's role to educate the public. It's not just for the benefit of counselors and staff and those in the know. It's for the general public. The numbers being thrown around here of several thousands of dollars was for a specific complaint report and comments on 2 pieces of legislation that he helped draft and then had questions and answers. So it's not even relevant to this discussion. This is a very small amount. I believe that you will be saving thousands of dollars in possible complaints when people have a much clearer understanding of the code of conduct and how the process is done. And so, because when people don't know, they feel they might file, and then he has to deal with all those things. And there is no other way for a citizen cannot ask for advice about a certain issue. So if it's made public, everybody can come and they can ask their questions. I think it's very simple. The other thing they're saying that these 2 individuals that didn't, that's not the public. Those are 2 individuals. The public is, there's 30,000 people here almost in this municipality. So that is, we give information sessions all the time in this municipality. And there's meetings all the time. Those cost money. This is something that is for the public. It's Bill 168. It's part of their whole right to know how it is done. And so I think that this should be passed. I'm for this.
Councillor Dunsmore?
So the invoices that I could question about were for the presentation. There were 3 people that signed up to be delegates and then turned their names down. Those are the only people I have ever heard from who have asked for clarification on this. So they had their opportunity and they missed it. You're throwing around $500 out there. He's got to come from Ottawa. It'll be an evening meeting. He's got to have a hotel. He'll have his per diem rate. I don't think 500 is anywhere near reasonable. The only thing I'd be willing to do is put a link up on our website to his website. And if he's got a canned presentation that he would come and do, we can put that presentation up, or perhaps the mayor can add it to one of his town halls. But to pay this gentleman to come back here at his rates, I'm not for that.
Councillor McCray?
I'm not in favor of this motion for the reasons I stated earlier. Also, the fact that Councillor Dunsmore mentioned that maybe the Integrity Commissioner already has a video explaining things to the public, that's worth exploring. But frankly, given the challenges we're dealing with right now with COVID-19, the fact that we've got people who've lost their jobs, people wondering about where their future income's coming from. I have people in my ward living in garages and on the river in canoes. I think there's more important places we need to spend the money at this point, and also where we need to be focusing our attention.
Okay, thanks, councillors. We have a mover and a seconder for this. Call this motion to question. All in favor of this motion as reads?
In favor.
3 in favor. All opposed? And that's 4 opposed, and this motion is defeated. Okay, moving on to section 11, the confirmatory bylaw. I have a recommendation of bylaws 2020-26. Oh, sorry. Yeah, our clerk is reminding me about something. We inadvertently passed the bylaw that was defeated by the town, and that is bylaw 2020-22. So I'd like to provide direction to staff to remove that from the bylaws that we passed. Okay. Now I can do the confirmatory bylaw. Bylaw to confirm the action of the council. So the bylaw 2020-26 to confirm the proceedings of the council at its meeting held May 25th, 2020 be introduced the first, second, and third time passed in open council. Mover for that. Councilor McCray, seconded by Councilor Dunsmore. Any opposed? And that's carried. Last thing, motion to adjourn. Councilor Kittredge, seconded by Councilor Dunsmore. All in favor? Any opposed to adjourning? Sorry, be consistent here. Any opposed to adjourning? Okay. We're adjourned. Have a great rest of the day. I don't even have a clue what time it is right now. And everybody stay safe. Thanks.